Chapter 188. Go to watch net. In the face of attacks from all directions, Li Yundong did not panic at all. His will had long been tempered like steel. At this critical moment of life and death, he stimulated endless fighting spirit and fighting talent. Go to watch net. He took a step back with his right foot, and then he turned around. The fan of 7 treasures in his hand instantly closed with a swoosh. He swung the head of the fan and hit the tip of the whip in front of him. With a crisp snap, the snake head that the whip had transformed into crashed into the fan of 7 treasures. With a muffled bang, it was forcefully smashed away. In particular, the moment the snake head crashed into the fan of 7 treasures, the treasured fan suddenly emitted a burst of golden light. The golden Sanskrit characters on the treasured fan suddenly lit up and released an incomparably powerful and dignified force that shook the snake head and instantly returned to its original form. With a flick of his wrist, Li Yunyang repelled the first whip that had come at him. Then, he turned around and opened the treasured fan in his hand with a clang. In an instant, it was as if a black iron wall had appeared in front of him, blocking him from the wind. Li Yundong waved his hand at the 3 5-young blood beads that were rotating at high speed. Whoosh! A violent gust of wind rose from the ground, and the 3 5-young blood beads were immediately bounced back by the strong wind. Taking advantage of this movement, Li Yunyang threw the fan of 7 treasures in his hand into the sky. His empty hands quickly pinched a Mahamudra, and the Yuanyang genuine qi in his body surged out of the Mahamudra. It was the Mahamudra of Vairocana, which did not carry a trace of evil qi all over his body. The exorcism mudra practiced by Dorji Tenzin was a fighting move, while the mantra Mahamudra cultivated by Li Yundong was a supreme protection magic. It was obvious which one was stronger and which one was weaker. When Dorji Tenzin saw Li Yundong's Mahavarokana mudra coming toward him, he was shocked and could hardly believe his eyes. How could such an evil person cultivate such a pure and powerful mantra Mahamudra without a trace of evil qi? How is this possible? Dorji Tenzin barely put his hands in front of his chest to block it, and he was hit away by the Mahavarokana mudra. Watch net. Just as his body was sent flying, he managed to dodge Wu Hao's sneak attack from behind. It was the 5 young blood flower pearl. Dorji Tenzin dodged the sneak attack, and the 5 young blood pearl went straight to Li Yunyang. At this time, the fan of 7 treasures in Li Yundong's hand was flying in the air again. He had no weapon to resist, so he was about to be hit. However, Li Yundong did not panic in the face of danger. An idea came to him. He took a deep breath and spat out a fierce, condensed, and vigorous qi from his mouth. In the past, when Li Yundong blew out a breath, although the breath was long and vigorous, it might not be condensed. But at this time, when Li Yundong blew out a breath, he could condense all the breath into a thin line like a strand of hair and blow it right on the 5 young blood bead. Previously, Li Yundong had used the fan of 7 treasures to fan the 3 5 young blood beads toward Wu Hao. This time, Wu Hao was scared out of his wits and hurriedly tried to catch the 3 5 young blood beads. However, the 5 young blood beads were rotating at a high speed. If he was not careful, the blood beads would immediately explode and swallow Wu Hao. However, Wu Hao was, after all, a disciple of a famous sect. With a somersault, he dodged one of the 5 young blood beads by a hair's breadth. Then, he caught the other 2 5 young blood beads with his 2 hands. His body spun on the spot like a spinning top, and the 5 young blood beads in his palms were also spinning. As long as he stopped his strength, the blood beads would immediately explode. His move was beautiful and wonderful, but he had not expected that Li Yundong's reaction would be even more beautiful and wonderful than his. He actually blew another 5 young blood bead back in one breath. When Wu Hao saw the 5 young blood bead coming straight at him, he was scared out of his wits. It was too late for him to dodge, so he had no choice but to copy Li Yundong's method. He took a deep breath and spat at the 5 young blood bead that was coming at him at high speed. At this moment, the difference between a Jindan and a Pseudodan was obvious. Li Yundong's breath was condensed like a thread, but it was as hard as steel. It forcibly spat out the blood bead and sent it flying back. However, although Wu Hao's breath was strong, it was scattered and not condensed. He only slightly blocked the momentum of the blood bead, and the 5-yang blood bead hit Wu Hao's body. In the blink of an eye, Wu Hao's entire body had turned into a burning ball of fire. He abruptly let out a miserable howl of pain. Just as his scream left his throat, it was immediately drowned out by the wailing of the vengeful spirits and malicious ghosts inside the 5-yang blood flower pearl. His Yin spirit didn't even have time to escape before it was completely devoured by the vengeful spirits. LV Fengping, who was beside him, suddenly screamed. Although she was dissolute and fickle, as a Taoist companion, she had true feelings for Wu Hao, especially when she saw her man being destroyed in body and soul. LV Fengping suddenly rushed toward Li Yundong like crazy. Go to see net. 7K. Li Yundong saw her face twisting and rushing toward him regardless of anything. Her 5 fingers were like hooks, and there was a faint blue light on her fingertips. Although her momentum was fierce and her appearance was terrible, he sneered in his heart. He took another step back and dodged LV Fengping's fierce claw. At this time, LV Fengping had lost her mind. Her mind was full of revenge for Wu Hao. As a cultivator, it was not terrible to have their bodies destroyed, because they could still get their Yin spirits out of their bodies and find a way to regenerate or reincarnate to cultivate again. But if their bodies and souls were destroyed, it would really be a tragedy, and they could even be called tableware. LV Fengping's fingernails were blue and glossy, and they were dipped in highly toxic poison. As long as she scratched a little skin, she could immediately poison people to death. Li Yundong had not cultivated to the realm of Yin spirit out of his body. As long as she scratched him, he would undoubtedly die. He wouldn't even have the chance to regenerate or reincarnate. LV Fengping missed the first claw. Just as she was about to scratch again, she suddenly heard a violent whistling sound coming from above her head. She subconsciously raised her head and saw that the fan of 7 treasures that Li Yundong had thrown into the sky had fallen at this time. Taking advantage of the moment she raised her head, Li Yundong quickly pinched the lion seal in his hand and spat out a mantra. Ma! This mantra came out of Li Yundong's mouth, like an invisible air cannon, and hit LV Fengping's face heavily. Her body shook violently, and her mind went blank in an instant. Following that, the lion seal came right after, hitting her squarely in the chest, causing her to lose control of her body and fly backward. At this time, Li Yundong raised his hand and accurately grabbed the fast-spinning fan of 7 treasures without looking. He turned around and waved the iron fan with its leaves open. Like waving a huge machete, he slashed at LV Fengping from head to toe. When the leaves of the fan of 7 treasures rotated at high speed, it was really like a chainsaw. With a muffled sound, LV Fengping was instantly split in half by Li Yundong's fan. LV Fengping's body was destroyed, and a ghost that looked exactly like her quickly flew out of her body. She screamed in fear and roared angrily, flying to a height of more than 20 meters like lightning. LV Fengping hovered high in the sky and shouted with resentment. Impossible! You are just a young boy who has just reached the Zhuji phase. How can you be so powerful? Who the hell are you? Tell me your name if you have the ability. Her expression was full of resentment, as if she couldn't wait to rush down and crazily bite Li Yundong's body. However, she was afraid of Li Yundong's amazing Yuanyang Qi, so she only dared to roar 20 meters away, not daring to take half a step forward. LV Fengping knew very well that with the strength and concentration of Yuanyang Qi that Li Yundong had shown just now, as long as she got a little closer, she would be scared out of her wits with a loud roar. Like Wu Hao, all her cultivation in this life would be in vain. Although it was the first time that Li Yundong had seen a ghost swimming out of a dead person's body, and it was the first time that he had been threatened by such a legendary ghost, the yang qi in his body was extremely strong. How could he be afraid of these demons and ghosts with threatening yin qi? Li Yundong snorted coldly and slammed the fan of 7 treasures in his hand heavily on the ground, causing the ground to tremble slightly. He pointed at LV Fengping, who was hovering in the air, and shouted, "A man never changes his name. Today I, Li Yundong, will kill you shameless people. Don't forget my name in your next life. I'll be waiting for you." LV Fengping gritted her teeth and roared, "Li Yundong? Li Yundong. Well, I'll remember your name. If I don't kill you in this life, I swear I won't give up. Li Yundong was furious. He only hated that he couldn't fly, and could only watch an enemy escape. He shouted, I wasn't afraid of you when you were alive. Do you think I'm afraid of a lonely ghost like you now? Get lost. This roar almost shattered the ghost of LV Fengping, who was 20 meters away. LV Fengping was so shocked that she retreated another 20 meters. She gave Li Yundong a hateful look and finally turned to leave. When LV Fengping left, she unwillingly released a ghost technique. In an instant, the air was filled with her resentful cries, curses and sad cries. For a moment, the cold wind was blowing around, and the world was gloomy, which made people's hair stand on end. Although Dorji Tenzin was a warrior monk, he had not cultivated Niden after all. For a moment, he couldn't help but shiver when he was pierced by the cold wind. However, Li Yundong sneered and waved the fan of 7 treasures in his hand. With a whoosh, he blew away the cold wind around him and shouted, Disperse! In the blink of an eye, the shouts, cries, and gusts of cold wind around him suddenly disappeared, and the hazy world became clear again. Li Yundong stood with his fan like a god. From the absolute disadvantage of fighting 1 against 3, he resolved the situation in the blink of an eye. He fought against many and defeated many. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. It could be said that the hare rose and the falcon fell, and the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Although Dorji Tenzin was among them, the moment he was sent flying, he suddenly understood that he had become an accomplice of Wu Hao and the others. If Li Yundong hadn't blown him away, he would have been burned to ashes like Wu Hao. Dorji Tenzin was shocked by Li Yundong's tyranny and ashamed of his inability to distinguish between good and evil. He sat cross-legged on the ground, put his palms together, recited a few scriptures, and then said in a deep voice, If you want to kill me, just kill me. I will never complain. /om/. Chapter 189. Go to watch net. In an instant, Li Yundong killed 1 person, killed 1 and defeated 1. Even if he was angry, most of the anger in his heart had been vented. He sneered and said, You monk are really stupid. How can you believe the words of others? Do you believe whatever they say? Dorji Tenzin raised his head and argued, I'm not a monk. I'm a lama. Li Yundong was amused by Dorji Tenzin's straightforwardness and laughed. Well, you're a lama. Hey, you stupid lama, you have some style. You didn't join forces with these 2 shameless people to beat me. Otherwise, I would have taken your life with that Mahamudra just now. Dorji Tenzin looked at Li Yundong with doubt in his eyes and asked in stiff Chinese, Who the hell are you? Why can you master our Tantric Mahamudra so quickly? It took my master 2 years to master it. Li Yundong asked curiously, Is it difficult to learn? Why do I think it's easy? Dorji Tenzin looked like he had been hit hard. Li Yundong's words hurt him very much. He had been practicing martial arts since he was a child. At the age of 18, he had reached the peak of the devil-subduing Mahamudra. He could already be regarded as a first-class genius in the world. After that, he had practiced the mantra Mahamudra, but because his cultivation was not high enough, he had spent 3 years without even entering the door. However, the Han man in front of him had already mastered the essence of the Mahamudra in less than a few days. Was he a monster or the reincarnation of Buddha? Dorji Tenzin stared at Li Yundong for a long time before he sighed and said dejectedly, My master once told me not to underestimate the people in the Central Plains. He said that there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers there. I didn't believe it before, but now I do. Go to watch net. 7K. I'm convinced that I will die in your hands. Li Yundong laughed. Did I say that I would kill you? Dorji Tenzin raised his head and asked in confusion. You won't kill me? Li Yundong snorted. I'm not a murderous devil. I'll kill whoever I see. After a moment of silence, Dorji Tenzin said in a deep voice. Then why did you attack so ruthlessly just now? Li Yundong sneered and said. Just now, those 2 people wanted to rob me of my treasures, so I naturally fought back. The first time I caught the man, he begged me to let him go. As a result, when I let him go, he immediately attacked me. Just now, he even wanted to kill you. Do you think I should kill such a sinister villain? Dorji Tenzin stopped talking. After a while he asked again, "Where's that woman?" Li Yundong sneered again and said, "As for that woman, she colluded with that man. I destroyed her body, but her soul didn't repent. Instead, it gnashed its teeth and wanted to take revenge. Watch net. I only hate myself for not having enough cultivation and not being able to get rid of the weeds by the roots. You Buddhists say to feed the eagle with your body, but I don't have such a noble demeanor. I won't let others bully me and let them do as they please. Amitabha." Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and said, "That's wrong. Buddha can also be angry, and Vajra can also be angry. We Buddhists don't just pay attention to forbearance. When it's time to fight back, we must fight back. Otherwise, our Buddhism would have been destroyed for thousands of years." Li Yundong said with a smile, "I saw that you were as pedantic as an old man, but now it seems that you are quite reasonable." Dorji Tenzin smiled slightly and said, "Although I, Dorji Tenzin, am short-sighted, I can still see good and evil clearly. In the future, if the cultivation sects of these two people come to make trouble for you, I will definitely stand up for them." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Let them come to me. I killed them. I will take responsibility for what I did." At this time his bad impression of Dorji Tenzin had disappeared, and he couldn't help thinking, "Anyway, I have finished reading the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra and memorized everything I should. This sutra is so important to them. Why don't I help them and return it to them?" Thinking of this, Li Yundong reached into his arms and took out the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra. He handed it over and said with a smile, "Fortunately, it wasn't burned just now." Dorji Tenzin had originally come to Li Yundong to ask for the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra, but such an embarrassing thing had happened halfway. Not only had he wronged a good person, but he had also become an accomplice of a criminal. In the end, he had even been saved by Li Yundong. Dorji Tenzin felt guilty. He didn't want to go back and be punished by the abbot, so he didn't mention this matter again. However, he hadn't expected that Li Yundong would take the initiative to return it. Dorji Tenzin was ashamed and shocked. He could hardly believe his eyes. He stammered, this. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Why? Are you afraid that I'm lying to you?" Dorji Tenzin took the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra and carefully put it close to his body. He put his palms together with emotion and bowed respectfully. "I underestimated the people in the Central Plains. I haven't asked for your name yet." Li Yundong smiled and said, "My name is Li Yundong. Go to the internet." 7K. OM. Dorji Tenzin praised. "It turns out to be Jinrenli. Clouds come from the east. Good name, good name." Li Yundong laughed and said, "You Lama, you shouted to kill me before, and now you flatter me. I have no benefits for you." Dorji Tenzin bowed respectfully and said, "Benefactor, the fact that you have returned this Mahamudra secret scripture is already a great kindness to our temple. We, the Catholic temple, will always remember this kindness." Li Yundong smiled and didn't say anything more. At this time, a gust of wind blew over, and the smell of blood was pungent. He frowned secretly and looked down at LV Fengping, who had been split in half. Dorji Tenzin noticed Li Yundong's gaze and said, "Are you worried about how to deal with this place? Don't worry. The vultures on the plateau will eat these corpses, and no one will care." After that, Dorji Tenzin suddenly had an idea. He walked over to LV Fengping's body, picked up a dark red whip, and then walked over to Wu Hao's ashes, which had been burned to ashes. He picked up 2 5-yang blood beads, blew the ashes on them, and wiped the blood on the whip. Then, he held them in front of Li Yundong with both hands and said, "If these things fall into the hands of others, they may harm them. I think it's better for you to keep them. Maybe you can use them to kill demons in the future." Li Yundong didn't stand on ceremony. He took the spoils of war, put them away, and said with a smile, "Kill demons? How can there be so many demons and demons in this world?" As he said this, Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He thought of the little girl he loved deeply. Wasn't she just a little demon? But such a little demon had never done anything bad. On the contrary, she was pure, lovely, and innocent. However, people like young master he bullied others, did all kinds of evil, and were heartless. Li Yundong immediately said with a solemn expression. In fact, the most terrible thing in this world is not demons, nor is it demons but people. When people do evil, they are 100 times more vicious than demons. Therefore, if demons do good, I will not only not kill them, but I will also protect them. If people do evil, I will not only not protect them, but also enforce justice on behalf of heaven. Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and praised. Good, good. Buddha said that those who do good in the world will have good results. There is no distinction between demons and ghosts. Even if they are demons, they can enter the Western paradise. But those who do evil in the world will have evil results. In the future, even the 9-5 supremes in the world will be thrown into the path of reincarnation, and will never be able to transcend. Li Yundong said with a smile. You Buddhists talk about karma and reincarnation. Any retribution has to wait for the next life. But we Taoists talk about cultivation in this life, and talk about retribution in this life. Fortunately, I am not a Buddhist. Otherwise, when I wait for the retribution of bad people, I will be worried to death. When Dorji Tenzin heard Li Yundong say that he was a Taoist cultivator, he was shocked. Are you from a Taoist sect? Li Yundong had just said that casually, because Su Chan and Zi Yuan had taught him the cultivation methods of the Taoist sects. So he had subconsciously regarded himself as a Taoist cultivator. However, Dorji Tenzin's question had stunned him. Which sect do I belong to? Which sect of Kung Fu do I practice? Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, Strictly speaking, I don't seem to be from a Taoist sect. Dorji Tenzin couldn't help but be stunned. What do you mean? Li Yundong smiled awkwardly and said, I haven't really been apprenticed to a teacher yet. Dorji Tenzin's face was suddenly full of shock. Did you learn it without a teacher? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, Not really. There are 2 cultivators who have taught me. One is from the Fox Zen school, and the other is from the Jingyi school. Dorji Tenzin rarely went out of the temple and practiced Mahamudra and Dharma all day long. He didn't know that the Fox Zen school had a bad reputation. When he heard the word Zen in it, he thought that they were from the same sect. He immediately laughed and said, I was wondering how you could practice Mahamudra so quickly. It turns out that you are from the same sect. But why is there a Jingyi school? Li Yundong sighed and said, It's a long story. Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, If you don't mind, why don't you go to Kathuo Temple to rest for 2 days? It can be said that Jinren Li and I don't know each other unless we fight. We can talk while drinking milk wine. What do you think, Jinren Li? Li Yundong thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, Forget it. Now that I have successfully built the Zhuji phase, I'm eager to go back. I can't wait to grow wings and fly back. I'll have a long talk with you when I have the chance. Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and said with regret, That's a pity. I hope that when you return to the Central Plains, you must remember that you still have a friend here. His name is Dorji Tenzin. Li Yundong smiled and said, Of course. As he said this, he carried the fan of 7 treasures on his shoulder and left quickly. Dorji Tenzin looked at Li Yundong's departing figure and couldn't help sighing. This person is so young, but he has such a cultivation quotient. The Central Plains is really a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. No wonder the Han people have been prosperous for thousands of years. Dorji Tenzin couldn't help but think of Li Yundong's calmness and response when he had fought against 3 people alone. In particular, he had taken a step back, thrown away the treasured fan, and made a Mahamudra move. It was really a combination of defense and defense. He had both the fist and foot kung fu of the external sects, and the Mahamudra kung fu of the cultivation sections. In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong had combined these together and turned the tide. He had defeated many people with fewer people. The talent he had shown were really admirable and awe-inspiring. Dorji Tenzin thought, Jinren Li has just built the Zhuji phase. When he first met a strong enemy, he has already shown the temperament of a master, who is calm in the face of danger. In time, he will definitely become a great master and a great craftsman. I strongly recommend the new book Sekal by Xiao Qian. the author of the fantasy novel Piao Miao Journey. If you are interested, hurry up and read it. This book can't be wrong. /om/. Chapter 190. Go to watch net. Li Yundong refused Dorji Tenzin's invitation and returned along the way he had come. After walking for more than an hour, the sky was already a little dark. He came to a clear and spacious river, bent down to drink a few mouthfuls of the cool river water, and washed his face a few times. Go to watch net. Net. Super_speed. More. New. Li Yundong raised his head and suddenly found a graceful figure standing in front of him. This person was wearing a long purple dress and a faint layer of white gauze. Her whole body seemed to be shrouded in a faint fairy mist. Her face was extremely beautiful, and her eyes were hazy and deep. It was Ziyuan. Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong carefully, and a hint of appreciation flashed in her eyes. Li Yundong was stunned when he suddenly saw Ziyuan. He looked around and said in surprise, "Why are you here?" Ziyuan said with a smile, "Didn't I say that I would come to you when you succeeded in the Zhuji phase?" Li Yundong said in surprise, "Do you have telepathy? How could you come so soon?" Ziyuan smiled but didn't say anything. Li Yundong suddenly had an idea and asked tentatively, "You won't be following me all the time, will you?" Ziyuan didn't answer. She turned around and walked in one direction. Li Yundong shouted behind her, "Hey, I'm talking to you. You haven't been following me all the way, have you?" But Ziyuan didn't reply. She just walked in front of him unhurriedly. Li Yundong caught up with her and said in a strange voice, "Hey, if you really follow me all the time and see me almost get into trouble along the way, won't you help me?" Ziyuan suddenly stopped, turned around, and said seriously, "Do you know what a saying in the Book of Changes says?" Li Yundong was stunned. "I don't know." Ziyuan said, "Heaven moves vigorously, and a gentleman should constantly strive to improve himself." Li Yundong's expression became serious. He vaguely understood what Ziyuan meant by this. Ziyuan looked serious, which was rare for her. She continued, "Do you know what this sentence means? What does it mean to constantly strive to improve oneself? Why don't you call him constantly strive to improve himself? If I appear to help you whenever you are in trouble, is that still considered cultivation? Always remember, the only one who can help you in this world is yourself." Li Yundong was shocked. He thought to himself, "Yes, if I hadn't cultivated so hard along the way, how could I have succeeded in the Zhuji phase on a peak of more than 6,000 meters? How could he have mastered the giant palm imprint so quickly? How could he have survived the sneak attack of those two criminals?" The first sentence of the Qian hexagram in the Book of Changes clearly stated, "As the heavens move vigorously, so should a gentleman ceaselessly strive to improve himself." Did he think that after obtaining the Rinyuan Jindan, he would not have to work hard, and all the benefits would automatically come to him? Li Yundong looked solemn and said seriously, "I've learned a lot. Thank you for your warning. I was being frivolous just now." Ziyuan nodded with a smile on her face. "You don't have to be so nervous. I've seen your performance along the way. The speed of your cultivation is really shocking and rare in the world. Just remember not to be complacent. You have to know that you have just entered the first door on the path of cultivation." Li Yundong nodded and looked a little emotional. "You're right. Human cognition is like a circle. Watch net." The area inside the circle was his perception, and the outside was the world. The smaller the area inside, the less contact I have with this world. When my knowledge suddenly expanded a lot, I found that I was even more ignorant about this world. Ziyuan smiled and said, "That's because you've come into contact with more unknown things. Your current cultivation progress is too fast. Although your skills are growing very fast, your cultivation foundation is still not solid enough. There are many things that you only know how, but you don't know why. For example, what's up with your Mahamudra Kung Fu? Where did the Mahamudra of Tantric Buddhism come from? Why does it have to be accompanied by mantras to be effective?" Li Yundong was stunned when he heard this, and his eyes lit up involuntarily. "Yes, why haven't I thought about this?" He looked at Ziyuan eagerly and asked, Can you tell me why? Ziyuan smiled and said, I still say the same thing. Heaven is vigorous, and a gentleman should constantly strive to improve himself. I can only show you a way. As for how to go on this road, that's your own business. After you go back, you can slowly look for relevant books and read them yourself. Li Yundong said in surprise. These books are also cultivation books like the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor. Are they everywhere? Ziyuan sighed and said, The Great Way is invisible, and Dali is simple. Go to watch net. Many people are anxiously looking at the broad road of cultivation from afar. But they never thought that the true road of cultivation is right under their own feet. Li Yundong had some understanding in his heart and nodded secretly. He said, Are we going to fly all the way back now? Ziyuan laughed and said, Fly back? Are you kidding? The terrain of the Qinghai Tibet Plateau is so high, and it is already very close to the sky. If you fly again, and it's midsummer now, aren't you afraid of being struck by lightning? Li Yundong asked in confusion. What's the reason? Ziyuan explained softly. This is the same as a lightning rod. Cultivators themselves are extremely powerful bodies of energy, and the heavens are very sensitive to these bodies of energy. It's fine if you stay low, but you yourself are a huge body of energy, and you are flying so high, especially in the summer when there are so many lightning bolts. If the lightning doesn't strike you, who will it strike? As she spoke, Ziyuan added, You must remember the two laws of the cultivation world. The closer you are to the sky, the closer the lightning is to you. The greater your strength, the greater the power of the lightning retribution in the future. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly. Doesn't that mean that I will be struck by lightning no matter what, and it will be the kind of death? Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, That's not necessarily true. Why do we Taoists cultivate to seek longevity? It's because we believe that man can triumph over nature. As she spoke, she took another step forward. As she walked forward, she said, Let's go. It's time to go back. When we go back, I can teach you the magic of Shintong. Li Yundong couldn't help but be excited when he heard this. Can you teach me the magic of flying first? Ziyuan smiled and said, You can't become fat in one go. Let's do it step by step. As she spoke, she remembered something. She took out a ticket from her pocket and handed it to Li Yundong, saying, This is your ticket. So nice. You even bought a ticket for me? Are you a fortune teller? How do you know that I will succeed in the Zhuji phase at this time? Li Yundong took the ticket with a smile, but after taking a look, he was stunned. No way, Pulai? Without turning her head, Ziyuan said, You're right, Pulai. Li Yundong was stunned and said, Do you mean the kind of train that stops at every stop, and the aisles are crowded with people? Even if you want to go to the toilet, you can't? Ziyuan stopped and couldn't help sighing. It seems so. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Really? I'm a man, so it's fine. But you, a beautiful woman like a fairy, are going to take this kind of pulai with me? Are you kidding me? Ziyuan turned her face and looked at Li Yundong. Do you think I'm an omnipotent immortal? Even if the sect behind me has a connection, it can't extend here. This is the land of the esoteric sect. I even lined up to buy this ticket. Li Yundong smiled apologetically and said, You can buy a train. Ziyuan showed a rare girlish expression. She rubbed her temples and said with a wry smile, Don't you know that it's the peak time for students to go back to school? It's very difficult to buy a ticket. Ziyuan's expression made Li Yundong suddenly realize that this beautiful woman in front of him, who looked otherworldly, was actually a girl about the same age as him. It turns out that a fairy also has to worry about such things in the human world? Li Yundong couldn't help but chuckle. Ziyuan glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help thinking, Today, I saw him fight 1 against 3. Although he was ruthless, killing one and killing another, his words and actions were still reasonable. He didn't let his anger get to his head. The few moves he used to turn defeat into victory were even more wonderful, showing the bearing of a grandmaster. She had thought that he was young and mature, but now it seemed that he was still a teenager. However, he was a boy who had just turned 20, not much older than Hong Ling, so she couldn't be too harsh on him. Li Yundong suddenly met an acquaintance in this strange Qinghai, Tibet plateau. Thinking that he could go back soon, he couldn't help but be in a good mood. He waved his hand and laughed. Let's go home. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly froze and asked, Where are we taking the train? Lessa, Ziyuan said. Li Yundong asked with a strange expression. How far is it from here? Ziyuan said with a faint expression. Probably a few 100 kilometers. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, Are we going to run all the way there? Ziyuan looked at him strangely. Do you want to fly there and be struck by lightning? As she said this, she pointed to the sky. Li Yundong looked up and saw dark clouds rolling above his head. He couldn't help cursing. Damn it, I've just reached the Zhuji phase, and now there's a dark cloud over my head. What do you mean? Ziyuan took a step forward and said, Let's go. You're not slow. After running for a few days, you'll be able to get there. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He laughed and said, I've got away. As he said this, he ran in the direction of his Zhuji phase. After a few steps, he looked back and saw Ziyuan standing there looking at him in confusion. Li Yundong ran back again, grabbed her hand and said, Just come with me. I have a way. Ziyuan was caught off guard, and her hand was grabbed by Li Yundong. Her body shook slightly and her eyes widened. She looked at Li Yundong holding her wrist in astonishment. Only then did Li Yundong realize that he had been a little rash. He let go of her hand and smiled embarrassedly. I'm sorry, I was just a little excited. Well, I didn't mean anything else. Don't think too much about it. I just suddenly remembered that the 2 guys who wanted to rob me just now left a car there. We can drive there. After all, it'll save us more time, right? Ziyuan was stunned for a moment before she regained her composure. She said lightly, It's okay. You lead the way, and I'll follow you. Although her expression was calm, when Li Yundong turned his back on her, her other hand unconsciously pressed on the wrist that had been grabbed by Li Yundong just now. Her thoughts were complicated, and for a moment, her eyes were faintly lost in thought. Once Jindan appears, the world will be settled, and the first thunder will show the truth. What does it mean to see the truth? Is it true love or the truth? She had thought that the last time this boy had attracted thunder to enforce justice on behalf of heaven, it should have been the psalm of the first thunder will show the truth. But after thinking about it, she felt that it was wrong. Although the boy in front of her was a rare cultivation genius in 100 years, he loved another woman deeply, and she had no feelings for him. No matter how she looked at it, it was impossible for the 2 of them to be together. What did Master's psalm mean? Looking at Li Yundong's back, Ziyuan couldn't help but feel a myriad of emotions in her heart and worry. /om/. Chapter 191. Go to watch net. Li Yundong laughed dryly a few times and walked quickly in front of her. After taking a few steps, he was worried that Ziyuan wouldn't be able to keep up with him if he walked too slowly. So he turned around and saw that Ziyuan was about a meter behind him, walking at a moderate pace. Go to watch net. 7K. OM. Li Yundong was curious. Does this fairy-like girl always have such a calm and detached demeanor? He couldn't help but speed up. His fast steps had already turned into a jog. After running for a while, he couldn't help but look back. However, he saw that Ziyuan was still following behind him at a moderate pace. Her pace was neither fast nor slow. She was still as calm as before, as if she was taking a leisurely stroll. Li Yundong simply ran quickly. His running speed was astonishing, no less than that of a cheetah. At this moment, he looked back and saw that Ziyuan was still following him at a leisurely pace. She was still calm and at ease. Li Yundong was convinced. He shook his head and sighed to himself. Oh my, the people from the righteous sects are really different. After running for a while, he ran back to the place where he had fought with Wu Hao, LV Fengping, and the others. Li Yundong saw that although there were still bloodstains on the ground, the bodies had disappeared. The Land Rover they had driven was still there. He was stunned and felt a little strange, but then he thought, Dorji Tenzin must have cleaned up this place. He turned to Ziyuan and said, The car is still here. As he said this, he got into the back seat of the Land Rover, patted the door, and said to Ziyuan with a smile, "It's a waste not to use it. Wouldn't it be a waste to leave it here for others to take advantage of?" Ziyuan sighed and shook her head. She thought to herself, why is this guy like a master for a while and a child for a while? Which side is his true nature? She followed him into the Land Rover, and also sat in the back. Li Yundong was stunned. Looking at Ziyuan, who was sitting side by side with him, he couldn't help saying, "Why are you sitting here? You don't know how to drive?" Ziyuan looked helpless. No. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "If you don't know how to drive, why did you follow me? Why didn't you stop me? Wouldn't it have been a waste of time?" Ziyuan looked at him speechlessly. "I thought you knew how to drive." Li Yundong put his head in his hands and shouted, "Oh my God, this is a joke!" Li Yundong and Ziyuan looked at each other in the back seat. After staring at each other for a while, Li Yundong said dejectedly, "Do we have to walk?" Ziyuan couldn't help laughing and said, "What's the matter? Zhenren Li has run more than 2,000 kilometers all the way here. You don't want to run now?" Li Yundong sighed. "I really want to tell Su Chan the news of my success in the Zhuji phase immediately. She must be very worried about me. She hasn't heard from me for nearly 2 months. I can't wait to go home." Ziyuan smiled slightly. She had wanted to say that the closer one got to the journey the better. But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she looked at Li Yundong's eyes, which were full of worry and concern. In the end, she didn't say it. Watch net. 7K. OM. Li Yundong gritted his teeth and said, "Forget it. I'll drive." Ziyuan asked curiously, "You? Didn't you say you didn't know how to drive?" Li Yundong snorted and said, "I haven't eaten pork, but haven't I seen a pig run?" As he said this, he got out of the car and went to the driver's seat. Li Yundong recalled some of the skills and movements of the drivers he had seen on weekdays. He turned the car key, put down the handbrake, and stepped on the accelerator. The engine of the Land Rover rumbled under the accelerator, but the car didn't move. Li Yundong said in confusion, "Strange, why isn't the car moving? It can't be broken, can it?" Ziyuan poked her head out from the back seat, pointed to the clutch and gear with a smile, and said, "How can you change gears if you don't step on the clutch? How can you drive if you don't change gears?" Li Yundong suddenly realized something. He stepped on the clutch and put the gear into our gear. Suddenly the car slammed backward. Although Ziyuan had the ability to predict, she had to do a divination beforehand to know. After all, she was not an immortal. How could she have known that Li Yundong had put the car into reverse gear? Ziyuan was caught off guard. Her body suddenly fell forward, and her forehead hit the back of Li Yundong's head heavily. Li Yundong and Ziyuan cried out at the same time, and held their heads. Li Yundong slammed on the brake and pulled the handbrake. The car immediately stalled. He rubbed the back of his head and looked back with his teeth bared, only to see Ziyuan covering her forehead with a painful expression. "Accident, it was purely an accident." Li Yundong smiled awkwardly. While rubbing the pain, he explained, "I didn't expect this thing to be so disobedient." Although Ziyuan was one of the best cultivators of the younger generation, she had not cultivated to the Jinshin phase of the Vajra body. She was a delicate beauty, but when she was hit by Li Yundong, she almost cried from the pain. "If you don't know how to drive, then don't." Ziyuan couldn't help complaining as she rubbed her forehead. "Go to the internet." Li Yundong smiled apologetically and said, "It was a mistake. It was definitely a mistake." The ancient said, "Everyone makes mistakes. Give me another chance." As he said this, Li Yundong took a deep breath and carefully started the car again. Then, he put it in first gear and gently stepped on the accelerator. However, the car roared, but it didn't move. Li Yundong was stunned and thought, "Impossible, why is it still not moving? This time I put it in gear." Li Yundong subconsciously stepped on the accelerator. The roar of the motor became louder and louder, but the car still didn't move. When Li Yundong stepped on the accelerator to the end, the Land Rover's motor roared like a monster, and the car slowly moved. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile proudly and say, "I'm really a genius. I can drive without a teacher. But after driving for a while, he found that no matter how he stepped on the accelerator, the car couldn't speed up. He couldn't help but wonder, this car is even slower than an ox cart. What's going on? It's not normal. Moreover, the more Li Yundong drove, the more he found that he could smell something burning. He twitched his nose and asked curiously, why is there a burning smell? Zi Yuan looked like she had been defeated by him. She rubbed her temples and pointed at the handbrake, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. You didn't put down the handbrake. Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. I was wondering what was going on. As he said this, he pressed down on the handbrake. Suddenly, the Land Rover was like a runaway wild horse, madly rushing out. Zi Yuan let out a cry and was thrown into the back seat. She couldn't help smiling bitterly and thinking, I really took the wrong medicine. Why did I have to accompany him to go crazy? Driving was actually a very low-skill thing, especially in a place like the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, where there were few vehicles and people. Even if Li Yundong used this place as a rally track, no one would care about him. As long as the car started, it would be easy to drive again. Li Yundong finally found the feeling of driving. He could feel the wind whistling in his ears. He couldn't help but laugh. See, I told you I'd be fine. This car is so cool to drive. It's as fast as lightning. Li Yundong thought for a moment, then laughed. Zi Yuan said with a wry smile, You said it was as fast as lightning after just one shift? Li Yundong responded, and immediately switched to second gear. Not long after that, he switched to third gear. After driving like this for a while, the Land Rover rushed to fifth gear. When the car went from first to fifth gear, the speed became obvious. The wind beside the car window was whistling, and it really felt like it was going to be fast. The more Li Yundong drove, the more comfortable he became. He couldn't help turning back and saying with a smile, Look, is there any problem? But when he turned back, he found that Zi Yuan was sitting in the back seat, her hands grabbing the handrails of the car door tightly. Her face was full of fear, as if the car would crash and she would die in the next second. Li Yundong usually only saw Zi Yuan's calm and ethereal temperament and expression. He had never seen her like this before. He suddenly laughed and said, Fairy, are you also afraid of racing? Zi Yuan was really a little scared by Li Yundong's rough driving skills. Although cultivators were sometimes powerful, they were not immortal. If there was a car accident, the doors on both sides would be locked, and there would be no place for her to escape. The car would become a ready-made coffin. Zi Yuan forced herself to calm down and said, I'm not afraid of racing, but I'm afraid of you driving. Li Yundong was choked by her words and laughed dryly. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Zi Yuan suddenly widen her eyes, straighten her body, point to the front and shout, Be careful. Li Yundong quickly turned his head, but suddenly saw that he had already deviated from the road. He suddenly screamed in fright and slammed his feet. This subconscious action of his was a mistake that almost all novice drivers would make. Stepping on the gas pedal as the brake pedal, the Land Rover suddenly roared out of the road. Fortunately, the Qinghai Tibet Plateau was wide, and there was only grass on both sides of the road. It was not like the city, where as long as one drove off the road, it would immediately cause a car accident. However, the grass road was not smooth, and the Land Rover was fast. The car suddenly became a mad bull in the Spanish bullring, jumping wildly on the grass. Zi Yuan, who was in the car, was so shaken that she almost fell apart. Her hair was messy and she looked embarrassed. She wanted to ask Li Yundong to stop, but the car was shaking so much that she couldn't even say a complete sentence. Hurry, hurry, stop, stop, stop. With just a few words, Zi Yuan almost bit her own tongue. The number one person of the younger generation in the cultivation world almost bit her tongue. No one would believe it. Only then did Li Yundong come to his senses and slam on the brakes. The roaring Land Rover suddenly screeched to a stop. Zi Yuan couldn't control her momentum, so she suddenly rushed forward and hit the back of Li Yundong's head with a bang. Li Yundong was hit by her, and with the inertia of the car, his head also hit the window. Fortunately, the window was bulletproof, so it didn't break his Jindam body. Li Yundong covered his forehead, feeling dizzy. He gritted his teeth and struggled to get up. He looked back and asked, Hey, are you okay? When he asked this, Li Yundong knew that he had asked too much. Ziyuan was sitting in the back seat with her hair disheveled. She was covering her nose with her hand and looking at him with resentment and anger in her eyes. The future leader of the Linggong sect of Jingyi school had been tortured like this. How could she be okay? Li Yundong laughed dryly. It's just an accident. It's just a small matter. Is your nose okay? It would have been better if she hadn't asked. But as soon as she did, Ziyuan suddenly became angry. Yes, I am indeed a cultivator who has been born into the world. I pay attention to calmness, but you bastard can't do this. You don't know how to drive, but you try to be brave. Now my nose is almost broken. Thinking of this, Ziyuan felt wronged. She had started cultivating when she was in her mother's womb. At the age of 10, she had reached the Zhuji phase. At the age of 18, she had become one of the best of the younger generation in the cultivation world. No matter who saw her, they would be respectful and polite, especially those male cultivators. Which one of them didn't treat her like an immortal? This person doesn't know how to be kind to women at all. Damn it. Ziyuan was so angry that she let go of his hand and said loudly, I'm okay? Can I be okay? She had hit herself too hard just now. If it weren't for the fact that the qi in her body was so strong that she could control the contraction of the blood vessels in her nasal cavity, she would have had a nosebleed by now. Although she hadn't made a fool of herself, her nose was still inevitably red, which made her look a little funny. Li Yundong had seen Ziyuan's fairy-like face many times, so when he suddenly saw her embarrassed appearance, he suddenly burst into laughter. However, he reacted quickly and forcibly controlled his laughter. It was a good thing that he didn't laugh out loud. He suddenly felt that the ethereal fairy in front of him seemed to have fallen into the mortal world. Although she was no longer as elegant as she used to be, she was a little more approachable. Notice. Due to some reasons, the previous Fox Group 2 is hereby invalid. The new Fox Group 2 is 1018899901. Everyone is welcome to be a guest. /om/. Chapter 192. Go to watch net. When Ziyuan saw Li Yundong's expression, she suddenly became angry and became bold. She covered her nose and got out of the Land Rover. She unceremoniously opened the door of the driver's seat and said in a muffled voice, Get out of the way, I'll drive. Li Yundong was shocked when he saw her questioning look. He said weakly, Didn't you say you didn't know how to drive? Ziyuan said angrily, If you can drive, why can't I? Li Yundong wanted to refute, but when he looked at Ziyuan's appearance he couldn't say anything. He could only smile awkwardly and move to the passenger seat. Go to watch net. 7K. Oh. Hong. Oh. Li Yundong watched Ziyuan sit in the driver's seat with fear. He couldn't help but reach out his hands to grab the handrail of the car door and say nervously in a loud voice, Hey, don't get excited. Don't kill yourself. Don't kill two people with one body, cough cough. Don't kill two people with one car. Ziyuan had never met such a shameless person like Li Yundong. She was so angry that she laughed. She started the car, put it in gear, stepped on the accelerator, and the Land Rover rushed out with a roar. Li Yundong finally knew what Ziyuan had felt just now. It was a feeling of helplessness. No matter how powerful a cultivator was, so what? If there was a car accident, he would still die unless he jumped out of the car. As soon as this thought flashed through Li Yundong's mind, he saw that Ziyuan had already returned to the road and accelerated to fifth gear. He suddenly shouted in horror, Damn it! Is it necessary to drive so fast? Do you think you're driving an F1 car? Ziyuan said unceremoniously in a loud voice, Didn't you drive so fast just now? Li Yundong yelled frantically, Did I just now? Hey, we're going more than 100 kilometers per hour. Slow down. Damn it, Schumacher. I'll apologize to you solemnly now, okay? Ziyuan turned her head and looked at Li Yundong with a straight face. Then she suddenly said with a fake smile, It's too late. Hey, look at the road. Li Yundong felt that he was worthy of being a Taoist cultivator. It was really karma, and it happened so fast. He kept shouting in horror. Damn it, don't you know how to drive? How did you drive so smoothly? Ziyuan didn't answer. She drove to a corner and suddenly didn't let go of the accelerator. Instead, she stepped on the brake at the same time and put down the handbrake. At the same time, she slammed the steering wheel with both hands. The Land Rover suddenly lifted up, and the friction of the front wheels suddenly increased, while the rear wheels were raised and spinning crazily. The whole car made a big turn. Li Yundong's whole body was stuck to the car door like a sticker. He shouted frantically, "What the hell? Didn't you say you didn't know how to drive? You actually knew how to drift and flick the tail." Ziyuan ignored him and continued driving, leaving Li Yundong to yell, "Hey, say something, please say something. Hey, you don't have to do this to me, right? I have no enmity with you. Hey, I know I was wrong. Can't we walk back? Holy shit, you're already at 200 yards? Holy shit. Help me." Li Yundong stretched his neck and screamed. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Watch net. 7K. Ziyuan was driving the Land Rover. And the more she drove, the more excited she became. She had the pleasure of getting her revenge. The more Li Yundong drove, the more frightened he became. He thought in despair. Confucius said that since ancient times, only women and villains are difficult to raise. I originally thought that Ziyuan, who was like a fairy, wouldn't be like this. But I didn't expect that a fairy was also a woman. While Li Yundong was worrying about Ziyuan, Suchan, the little fox, was cultivating with her master in the distant Dongwu city. The little lass felt that she had been feeling a little restless recently. She didn't know why, but even when she was meditating, she always felt that she couldn't calm her mind or calm down. The little girl closed her eyes and frowned. Although she was meditating, her face was full of impatience. She opened one eye and carefully glanced at Ao Wushuang, who was meditating in front of her. She hesitated for a moment and wanted to speak, but when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she swallowed them back. Although Ao Wushuang's eyes were closed, she seemed to know her disciple's every move. She closed her eyes and asked calmly, "What do you want to say? If it's still the same, don't ask again." Suchan was happy at first, but then she was disappointed. She lowered her head with puffed cheeks. But after a while, she still raised her head and asked weakly, "Master, has Yundong succeeded in the Zhuji phase?" Ao Wushuang opened her eyes helplessly. "You've asked this question 4,815 times. Suchan didn't care about meditating and practicing qi. She smiled cheekily, rushed to Ao Wushuang, and hugged her arm coquettishly. "Master, don't you have the ability to count fingers? You can count." Ao Wushuang was speechless by this precious disciple. She sighed and said, "Since last month, you have been asking me this question. I can't calm down even when I'm meditating and practicing qi. For a whole month, not only did I not make any progress, but I even regressed. If word of this gets out, it will be a huge joke." Suchan was obviously annoyed by Ao Wushuang's scolding. Not only was she not ashamed, but she said with a smile, "Master, then let me go back to Yundong. Only by his side can I calm down and cultivate." Ao Wushuang was so angry that she scolded, "You be asterisk starred. I've caught you 10 times in a month, and you still have the nerve to say that. Don't you know that if you go to his side now, not only will you cause trouble for him, but you will also implicate him and make him unable to pass the heavenly tribulation? Do you want to die with him, or endure the pain of lovesickness for a moment, so that you can be with him in the future?" Suchan pouted. She wasn't stupid. How could she not understand these things? But sometimes people clearly knew that they shouldn't do something, but their hearts still itched to do it. Watch net. 7K. Suchan lowered her head listlessly and muttered, "I'm just going to take a look at him and then leave. I don't know if he has gained weight or lost weight in the past 2 months." Ao Wushuang saw her little daughter's expression. If it had been a month ago, she would have had some sympathy and pity for her. But now there was only anger in her heart. She immediately said angrily, "It hasn't even been 2 months. As the successor of Jin Dan and a cultivator, if he has gained weight after 2 months of cultivation, Then he doesn't have to wait for the heavenly tribulation to come. He can just find a rope and hang himself. Su-chan immediately raised her head and made a face. Don't talk about my Yundong like that. Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. Isn't that what you said? Su-chan lowered her head and said in a sullen voice, her fingers tugging at the corner of her clothes. After a while, she raised her head and asked again. Master, can you calculate again and see if he has succeeded in the Zhuji phase? You said that if he succeeds in the Zhuji phase, you will know. Ao Wushuang was a little driven crazy by her precious disciple. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she suddenly saw a paper crane flying in from outside the window. This crane was very small, almost half the size of a little fingernail. If one didn't look carefully, they would think it was a white fly. Ao Wushuang opened her palm, and the little crane obediently stopped in her palm. As soon as it fell, it turned into a ball of flame in the blink of an eye. After a while, it turned into a small mass of ashes. Ao Wushuang's expression changed. Her eyes flickered as she stood where she was without saying a word. Although Su-chan was curious, she didn't dare to disturb her master. She just looked at her eagerly, looking forward to something. After a while, Ao Wushuang came to her senses. Seeing the little girl like this, she couldn't help laughing. Well, now you can rest assured. Your Yundong has finally succeeded in the Zhuji phase. Now you can cultivate in peace, right? When Su-chan heard this, she was overjoyed. With a scream, she rushed to Ao Wushuang, grabbed her hand and jumped up and down. Is it true? Is it true? Ao Wushuang looked at her precious disciple lovingly and pretended to be unhappy. When have I ever lied to you? Are you relieved now? Can you cultivate in peace? Su-chan giggled and said, Master, you treat me the best. By the way, Master, since Yundong has succeeded in the Zhuji phase, can I go back? Anyway, I won't affect him anymore. Ao Wushuang suddenly became furious, and her two willowy eyebrows raised. You be ****, why are you so stubborn? After he succeeds in the Zhuji phase, it will be a great opportunity for him to improve his cultivation. The divine punishment will come at any time. Are you going to die? Su-chan was scolded so much that she couldn't raise her head. She lowered her head and couldn't see her expression, but her eyes were rolling. She thought to herself, Humph, I'm just going to take a look and we'll be back soon. You won't even let me go. Bad master. Ao Wushuang knew her disciple very well. Although Su-chan's head was lowered, her eyes were rolling around in her eyes. She knew that the little girl must have some evil ideas in her mind. So she warned her sternly. I'm telling you, you're not allowed to go to his side. Do you hear me? Otherwise, I'll take it as if you don't exist and expel you from the sect. Su-chan was shocked. She knew that her master had never said such things to her, so she couldn't help but feel a little scared. She said timidly, Okay, I know. Ao Wushuang saw that although the little girl was unhappy, there was no strange look in her eyes. She was a little relieved and said, I'll buy you dinner. Wait at home and don't run around. Seeing her turn around and go out, Su-chan couldn't help muttering in a low voice. You don't even know how to cook. You eat box meals all day long. Yundong has never treated me like this. Ao Wushuang, who had walked to the door, staggered. She suddenly turned around and said angrily, Evil disciple, what did you say? Su-chan was startled and quickly ran into the inner room. After hiding in the room, she poked her head out and made a face. That's right. Ao Wushuang was so angry that she couldn't do anything about it. She shook her head and went out of the door. She kept sighing. Girls are extroverted. It's true. She went out and bought dinner. When she returned home, she placed the rice on an antique square table. As she said it, she shouted, Chana, it's time to eat. But after Ao Wushuang shouted for a while, she didn't hear any movement in the room. If it had been any other time, the little girl would have rushed out cheering. Ao Wushuang's heart tightened and she thought to herself, This girl can't be so bold. She even dares to disobey my master's order? She walked to the door of Su-chan's room and pushed it open. Sure enough, the room was empty. There was no one in it. There was a note on the table which said, Master, I'll go back and take a look. I'll be back soon. Ao Wushuang flew into a rage. A string of flames rose from her hand and burned the note to ashes. she said angrily. Do you think you can outrun me? After that, she flashed out of the door in the blink of an eye. Not long after she went out, another figure suddenly appeared in the room. It was Su-chan. The little girl stuck out her tongue and giggled. Master, I didn't sneak back by myself. I went back with you. It's not against my master's order, is it? But as soon as she finished speaking, she heard a cold and complacent voice behind her. Little girl, not bad. You know how to play the trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Ao Wushuang proudly poked the shintang acupoint on the little girl's back with her finger. Suddenly, the little girl's figure suddenly twisted, and then disappeared in an instant. She turned into a talisman and floated down. Ao Wushuang picked up the talisman in astonishment, and saw that there were not only incantations and runes written on it, but also a ghost face drawn on it. It said, Master, not only do I know how to lure the tiger away from the mountain, but I also know how to disguise myself. After reading it, Ao Wushuang realized that this was an illusion deliberately left by the little girl. She suddenly became furious. Evil disciple, how dare you fight with me? /om/. Chapter 193. Go to watch net. Realizing that she had been tricked, Ao Wushuang rushed out of the door again in the blink of an eye. But not long after she rushed out, she rushed back again. She looked around suspiciously and shouted, Evil disciple, if you don't want to be expelled from the sect, come out now. But even after she shouted for a while, the surroundings were still quiet. Not a single sound could be heard. Go to watch net. 7K. You really ran away. After that, her figure instantly turned into a green light, and left in the blink of an eye. After a long time, a figure slowly appeared in the room. Her eyes kept rolling, and her face was full of vigilance. It was Su-chan. After a long time, a figure slowly appeared in the room. Her eyes kept rolling, and her face was full of vigilance. It was Su-chan. Su-chan patted her chest and said with lingering fear, Fortunately, I was careful, or I would have been tricked. Su-chan was only a three-tailed spiritual fox. Compared with her master, the magic she knew was not as many, but she was proficient in the magic of hiding, especially the invisibility spell and the illusion spell. If she hadn't cultivated this kind of magic to a higher level, Ao Wushuang wouldn't have dared to give her the Rinyuan Jindan. But the magic that Ao Wushuang had painstakingly taught to Su-chan in the past was now being used on her. How could she not be angry? Su-chan naturally knew this. She stuck out her tongue, put her palms together and begged, Master, you are a magnanimous person. You won't argue with me, right? I'm just going to take a look. After that, she also turned into a green light, and went straight to Tiannan City. As soon as she flew into the air, Su-chan felt as if there was a pair of incomparably majestic eyes staring at her from the sky. An extremely powerful force was gradually accumulating above her head, as if thunder would fall at any time. Su-chan's heart was beating wildly. She knew that at this time, there was the most thunder. She was actually flying in the air, which was simply telling God, I am a cultivator, come and strike me. However, Su-chan was penniless, and there was no way she could take the train back. She had no choice but to bite the bullet and fly back. After flying for more than an hour, a terrible omen suddenly flashed through her heart. She shivered and quickly landed on the ground. Su-chan looked up and saw dark clouds rolling in the sky, piling up above her head. Thunder and lightning flashed in the clouds. Su-chan shivered and didn't dare to fly again. She ran quickly on the ground. She waited until the dark clouds above her head slowly dissipated, then flew up again. When the dark clouds in the sky gathered again, she landed on the ground again. Watch net. After more than 2 hours, Su-chan finally returned to Tiannan City. As soon as she stepped into the city, she seemed to feel a familiar aura in the air. Su-chan stood at the end of the streets of the city, looking at the intertwining flow of people on the street. Although these people's faces were strange and cold, the little girl felt that in the next second, Li Yundong's face, which made her yearn for him day and night, would appear in the crowd. The little girl stood on the street in a daze for a long time. Her expression suddenly became a little dull, and her eyes became a little erratic. After a long time, she came to her senses and hid in a place where no one could see her. She turned into a blue light again and flew toward the home where she and Li Yundong lived. It was almost dusk. Su Chan flew to the balcony of her home in Hongqing District. She was surprised to find that the broken glass door of her home had been replaced. Su Chan reached out and gently pushed the glass door. Fortunately, the glass door was not closed. Su Chan walked into the home and looked at the furnishings in the home obsessively. Her fingertips greedily touched the skin of the leather sofa, as if she was feeling Li Yundong's aura. Everything is the same. Nothing has changed. Su Chan couldn't help smiling, but her eyes were a little moist. She glanced around the living room and suddenly found a vase on the coffee table on the table. There were a few fresh flowers in the vase. The petals were delicate and bright. It was obvious that they had been planted recently. Su Chan was stunned. Is there someone else living here? Su Chan suddenly remembered that when she called last time, it was another woman who answered Li Yundong's phone. Her heart suddenly tightened. Could it be the woman from last time? She lives with Yundong? Su Chan's heart suddenly twisted into a ball. Her heart seemed to be squeezed hard, and she suddenly felt a little breathless. Su Chan was shocked and afraid. Although Li Yundong had explained it to her, she still thought in panic. Yundong is so outstanding. There must be many women who like him. He is not a person who is good at rejecting others. I haven't been by his side for so many days. Isn't it normal for a woman to live in this house? Chaner, it's okay. Yundong won't abandon you. He likes you. He said himself that he would never leave you. Su Chan stood in the living room, biting her lip and looking at the vase. She said this to herself, as if she was cheering herself up and comforting herself. Go to the internet. 7K. OM. After a while, Su Chan's eyes were full of tears. She heard something behind her. She looked back and saw Ao Wushuang standing behind her. When Su Chan saw her master, she couldn't stop crying. She burst into tears and threw herself into her master's arms, saying, Master, Yundong has another woman. Ao Wushuang had been furious because of Su Chan's willfulness. She had wanted to teach her a lesson when they met, but when she saw the girl crying, her heart immediately softened. She comforted her and said, You stupid girl. How do you know that he has another woman? Su Chan raised her head and said with tears in her eyes, I saw a vase of flowers in the room. It was just put in today. Yundong never does these things by himself. It must be another woman who did it for him. Ao Wushuang sighed and said, You're really stupid. It's just a vase. How can you be sure that he has a woman? Besides, if you really want to be with him, then you have to remember clearly that you can't not trust him. If you really love him, then you have to trust him. Otherwise, don't love him, and save yourself from endless troubles in the future. Su Chan sniffled, wiped away her tears, and looked at her master eagerly. I know what you're saying, but I'm just sad. Ao Wushuang pretended to be angry and said, You're already crying before you see him. If you really see him, won't you die? Hurry up and go back with me, or I'll really expel you. Su Chan rubbed the corner of her clothes with her hand and asked timidly, Can I go to Yundong's room and have a look? I want to smell his breath. Foxes were suspicious by nature. Once they suspected something, it was as if there was a knot in their hearts that was difficult to untie. Su Chan said it nicely, but she really wanted to smell the smell of Li Yundong's bed. If he really had another woman, she would be able to smell it at once. Ao Wushuang knew what her beloved disciple was thinking. She was so angry that she laughed and waved her hand impatiently. Go, go. Su Chan said, wiped her tears again, and pushed open the door of Li Yundong's room. She looked timid, as if she was afraid of something. Su Chan pushed the door open and closed it, as if she didn't want Ao Wushuang to see what she was doing. Ao Wushuang shook her head, and was speechless at Su Chan's childish temper. She stood in the living room and looked around. After waiting for about a minute, she couldn't help but say, Hey, are you done? She shouted, but there was no movement inside. Ao Wushuang suddenly became vigilant. Could it be that this girl really noticed that there was another woman in there, and took it too hard? Ao Wushuang immediately rushed over, pushed the door open and shouted, "Chaner!" As soon as she opened the door, she saw Su Chan sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to her, in a daze. Hearing Ao Wushuang's shout, Su Chan turned her head. Her beautiful face was full of tears. Ao Wushuang immediately said with a frosty face, "What's wrong? That heartless man really has another woman?" Su Chan smiled through her tears. She held up a pink Hello Kitty piggy bank with both hands and said happily, "Master, look." Ao Wushuang didn't know what her precious disciple wanted to do. She said in confusion, "What are you looking at? Isn't it just a piggy bank?" Su Chan shook her head and said, "No, this is a piggy bank that Yundong bought for me. I just found out that he has been putting this piggy bank next to his pillow." Ao Wushuang couldn't keep up with her little girl's thoughts and asked tentatively, "And then?" Su Chan's eyes suddenly became very gentle. Her gaze was so bright that even well-tempered steel could be softened. She said softly, "This means that when he was here, he thought of me every day. When he saw this piggy bank, it was as if he saw me. Moreover, when he went to the Juji phase this time, he didn't break this piggy bank and take out the money inside. He almost had no money on him, but he didn't have the heart to break it. It can be seen that he has me in his heart." Ao Wushuang looked at Su Chan and couldn't help sighing. "You silly girl, now you're finally relieved, aren't you? Can you go now?" Su Chan carefully put the piggy bank back in its original position. She raised her head and said with a pleading face, "Master, can I leave a note? Tell him not to worry about me. When I go back, I will listen to you obediently." Ao Wushuang said helplessly, "Forget it, you can write it. If I don't let you write, I think you'll be in Chao Ying's camp with me." Su Chan smiled happily. "Master, you're the best." As she said that, she rummaged through the bedside table for a while and found a notebook and a pen. She bit the tip of the pen and thought for a while before writing on the paper. "Uncle, Xiaonyo came back. Xiaonyo missed you very much." "Uncle, did you miss Xiaonyo?" But after she finished writing, she felt that it was inappropriate, so she tore off another page and wrote, "Yundong, have you succeeded in the Juji phase? I miss you very much. I miss you very, very much." After writing, she seemed to be afraid that Li Yundong didn't know who had written this note, so she wrote her name at the bottom, Su Chan. But after the little girl finished writing, she tilted her head and looked at it for a while, then tore it up again discontentedly. Ao Wushuang couldn't help but say impatiently, "Are you done?" Su Chan was urged, so she simply didn't write anything else. She only wrote a few words on the paper, and then pressed them under the piggy bank. Ao Wushuang couldn't help laughing. "Aren't you afraid that he won't see it?" A trace of cunning flashed in Su Chan's eyes. She said, "If Yundong really cares about this piggy bank, he will definitely find it." Ao Wushuang said, "Aren't you afraid that he won't care about it and won't find it?" Su Chan shook her head hard. "No, I believe him." Then, she took Ao Wushuang's hand and said, "Master, let's go back." Ao Wushuang sighed and said angrily and helplessly, "You be *starred girl, I really can't do anything about you." After that, the two of them turned into a beam of blue light and left. 24 hours after they left, Li Yundong finally returned to the southern city of China from the distant Qinghai Tibet Plateau. After experiencing a bumpy and dusty journey, Li Yundong stumbled into his house. Last week, he ranked 8th on the flower list, and this week, he was still updated on the 2nd, 4th, and 6th. There are more and more flowers every week. Not bad, not bad. Those who are online can also come to the website to register an account and give me flowers. The more flowers you send, the higher your ranking is, the more I will break out. Fair trade, honest to the old and the young, hehe. In addition, I recommend you Ji's new book, The President's Second-Hand Bride. Those who like romance can go read it. /om/ Chapter 194. Go to the net. Oh my god. As soon as Li Yundong entered the house, he threw the fan of 7 treasures aside and collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath like a dead dog. To watch the net. Zi Yuan stood at the door and looked at Li Yundong with amusement. Are you exaggerating? Who would believe that you're a foundation establishment cultivator if they see you like this? Li Yundong lay on the floor, raised his hand and struggled to say, You drove me all the way back, and I was squeezed all the way back at the train station. Even an immortal couldn't bear it. Damn it, there are too many people in China. The train station was crowded. Zi Yuan walked in, closed the door, and sat in a chair in the dining room. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, What does it have to do with me? Ever since this fairy-like woman had been in the state of racing, she seemed to have fallen from the sky into the mortal world. When she talked to Li Yundong, she couldn't help but feel a little more human. She was no longer as indifferent as before. Although she was smiling, her smile seemed to be as distant as a natural chasm. Li Yundong said weakly, Anyway, I won't take your car in the future. The corners of Zi Yuan's mouth curled up. She brushed aside the black hair scattered around her cheek and said with a smile, Did you get so crowded on the train? Why don't I feel crowded? Li Yundong raised his head and said with grief and indignation, Nonsense, if I hadn't blocked for you, you would have been squeezed into a photo. How dare you make sarcastic remarks here? Zi Yuan shook her head and laughed. You traveled a long way. I didn't see you complain about being tired when you walked to Tibet. Why did you complain about being tired when you came back by train? I really don't understand you. Li Yundong laughed and struggled to get up. I don't understand you. You look like a fairy one moment, and then you look like a witch the next. Do you have a split personality? Zi Yuan was stunned, and the smile on her face suddenly disappeared. She became silent and did not say a word. Li Yundong's heart trembled. I was right. No way. He smiled embarrassedly, got up and said, I'm going to take a shower and change my clothes. I'm no different from a beggar in this outfit. As he spoke, he walked into his bedroom. After changing out of his dirty clothes, he threw them directly into the trash can. He found a change of clothes for himself and went into the bathroom to watch the net. After all, taking a bath in the bathroom was different from taking a bath in the river. Li Yundong happily rubbed off all the mud on his body. After taking a bath, he felt as if his body had become 10 or 20 kilograms lighter. He only felt refreshed and comfortable all over. After Li Yundong came out shirtless, he was surprised to find that Zi Yuan was still sitting in the living room, as if she was thinking about something in a daze. He asked curiously, Aren't you going back to take a shower? Zi Yuan seemed to wake up from a dream and turned to look at Li Yundong. She saw that the boy was half naked. The attack of the Rinyuan Jindan and his own hard work made his upper body look like an inverted triangle. The lines of his muscles were almost perfect, not as exaggerated and terrifying as those of bodybuilders. However, his whole body was full of tendons and muscles, and under his leather-like skin, there was a strong explosive force. The boy's shoulders were very wide, and the deltoid muscles on his back were unusually developed, giving people a strong sense of security that even if the sky fell, he would be able to hold on. The 6 muscles on his abdomen were as hard as a layer of armor. After looking at Li Yundong for a while, she suddenly smiled and said, You still look like a beggar after taking a shower. Do you know why? Li Yundong looked at himself. After making sure that he was clean, he raised his head and said in confusion, I don't know. I've already washed it clean. Zi Yuan smiled and pointed at Li Yundong's face and hair. Go and look in the mirror. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He ran back to the bathroom, picked up the razor, and shaved his face clean. Suddenly, he changed from a bearded man to a handsome young man. The only flaw was that his hair was a little long, which made him look like a beetle. Li Yundong walked out of the bathroom, smiled and said, I can't cut my hair by myself. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Zi Yuan smiled and said, Do you have scissors in your house? Li Yundong was stunned. Yes, you want to help me cut it? Zi Yuan didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and sat quietly in her seat, looking at Li Yundong. Look at the net. 7K. OM. There was always a special power in this woman's eyes that could make people do something for her willingly. Li Yundong walked into the room and found the scissors. He handed them to her and said, "Can you do it?" Ziyuan pulled a chair from the dining table, pulled down the tablecloth on the table, and tied it around Li Yundong's neck. She smiled and said, "It's not worse than driving." When Li Yundong heard this, his face turned ashen. He immediately wanted to jump up and run for the door. But Ziyuan seemed to have expected his reaction. She put her hands on Li Yundong's shoulders and pressed him down. Li Yundong struggled hard, but he couldn't break free from Ziyuan. He suddenly smiled bitterly and said, "Hey, don't mess around. If you can't cut it, I'll have to shave my head. I've never shaved a monk's head since I was a child." Ziyuan didn't answer directly. She just cut off a section of his black hair with the scissors in her hand. Li Yundong's heart suddenly trembled. "Well, she cut first and reported later. Forget it, just bear with it. As long as you don't shave a Mohican or a scabby head." Ziyuan cut a few times and found that Li Yundong's face was full of bravery and fearlessness. His eyes were even more tragic than Lu Hulin's. She couldn't help laughing and said, "Don't worry. I raised Hongling since she was a child. I cut her hair. Do you think I can cut hair?" When Li Yundong heard this, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled and said, "That's good. I thought you used my head as an experimental field." Ziyuan pursed her lips and said with a smile, "With your hair that looks like a chicken's nest, you still want to experiment with it? I think it's just a field of weeds at most." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Whether it's an experimental field or a field of weeds, don't mess around. Just cut it flat for me." Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, "I won't. Don't worry." "Well, I can rest assured that you can do it." Although Li Yundong said that she was a good helper, he thought to himself, "You have a criminal record first. I'm not at ease at all." Ziyuan's hands were dexterous, and the scissors were fast. Li Yundong only felt that she was busy beside him. The scissors made a clicking sound, and his hair fell off piece by piece. He couldn't help but say, "Alas, it's only been 2 months. Why is it so long?" Ziyuan said, "Isn't there an answer in the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He patted his forehead and said, "I understand. It's because my qi and blood are too vigorous, right? If my qi and blood are vigorous, my hair will also be vigorous. That's why my beard and hair grow so fast." Ziyuan nodded slightly and said, "Cultivation is not only about practicing magic. You have to understand the operating rules of these magic, and you also have to understand the theory and scientific principles of cultivation." Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh and say, "The scientific principles of cultivation? Hey, if it were in the past, I would have scoffed at this sentence, but now that I think about it, I really feel that there is some scientific principles in cultivation." Ziyuan said lightly, "What do you mean by there is some scientific principles? Let me ask you, what is the operating rule of a computer? Why can a few chips and circuit boards be able to transmit so many things and calculate such a huge number? Why does the computer respond when you click the mouse? What is the scientific principle in this?" Li Yundong was tongue-tied. "How would I know?" Ziyuan asked again. "Then do you know how an atomic bomb is made? What is the scientific principle in this?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "I'm a liberal arts student. How would I know these things?" Ziyuan nodded and said, "By the way, although you have 1 foot in the door of cultivation now, in fact, you have only stepped into the door of cultivation, but your thinking has not entered the door. Even though you've read the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor and have a general understanding of cultivation, you don't know much about the actual cultivation. The scientific principles of cultivation are the same as the scientific principles of computers and atomic bombs. If you don't learn and study them, you will always feel that these things are inconceivable. It's like looking at flowers in the fog. It's incredible." Li Yundong sighed and said, "I understand what you're going to say. I'll go to the Xinhua bookstore tomorrow." Ziyuan laughed and said, "What are you going to do there?" Li Yundong asked in confusion. "Didn't you take me there to buy books last time?" Ziyuan shook her head and laughed. Why don't you remember after telling you so many times? Sometimes the great Tao is under your feet, but you haven't paid attention to it. Li Yundong was stunned. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, You mean the school library? Ziyuan nodded and said, Yes, although Tiannan University is a third-rate school, its library is still good. The collection of books is very comprehensive. You can find a lot of knowledge you want to learn in it. Li Yundong smiled and said, That's good. It saves me money. After that, he suddenly thought of something and said, By the way, the new semester is about to start, right? It seems to be in the next 2 days. Alas, I don't know how Zhou Qin is doing. Will she be implicated by my affairs? As soon as Li Yundong thought of this, his thoughts drifted far away. The scene of him leading the heavenly thunder to kill young master, he seemed to be still vivid in his mind. Zhou Qin had said that she would help him avoid this matter. But after all, he had killed someone. And it seemed that the person was a second generation with a very strong background. He didn't know how Zhou Qin was doing now. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh. He knew that Zhou Qin liked him, so she had been silently contributing. However, he didn't accept her help. She had helped him block the wind and rain, but he hadn't contacted her at all in the past 2 months. This was a little unreasonable. Thinking of this, Li Yundong wanted to call Zhou Qin, but as soon as he thought of this, he smiled bitterly. His phone had been sold, and he didn't remember her number. How could he contact her? It seemed that he had to wait until school started. Li Yundong sighed. It was fine that Zhou Qin didn't know the news, but what about Su Chan? What about the little girl? Was she okay? It would have been fine if Li Yundong didn't think about it. When he thought about it, he felt that his longing for her was like a tide, almost burying him. Li Yundong couldn't wait to pass the heavenly tribulation immediately, and then fly with the little girl. But Li Yundong knew that cultivation was like sailing against the current, going against the heavens. A little carelessness could lead to eternal damnation, not to mention that the heavenly tribulation might come at any time. The little girl's words before she left were right. Li Yundong, you have to become stronger. /om/ Chapter 195. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong sat in his seat in a daze. Ziyuan, who was behind him, seemed to have sensed what he was thinking. She couldn't help glancing at him, and a trace of emotion flashed through her eyes. Go to the Watch Net. 7K. She thought to herself. This man, he hasn't even passed the heavenly tribulation yet, but he's already worried about others. He's really a person who has tender feelings for women. He's quite like my master. Seeing that Ziyuan didn't speak, Li Yundong was silent for a while, then continued the topic just now. Speaking of which, I thought you would continue to teach me magic without stopping. But I didn't expect you to ask me to go back to school to study. In fact, I don't understand. Why do I have to go back to school when I've already started cultivating? Ziyuan used her hand to lift Li Yundong's long hair by his ear and cut it with a knife. She said, Cultivation is divided into 2 kinds. Cultivation in the secular world and cultivation in the secular world. Some cultivators have been cultivating in the secular world all their lives, while others have been cultivating in the secular world all their lives. There is no difference between the two, but no matter which one it is, there will inevitably be flaws and regrets. People who have been cultivating in the secular world all their lives will not be affected by the secular world. Their skills are pure and their strength is strong, but in fact, their Taoist heart has not been tested and tempered. Once they meet a cultivator with a strong will, and whose skills are not far from theirs, they will most likely be defeated. Li Yundong listened attentively and couldn't help asking, Why is that? Ziyuan stopped and said solemnly, You must remember that the battle between cultivators is not about who has higher skills. Otherwise, you would have become a pile of bones on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau by now. Wu Hao and LV Fingping's cultivation is much higher than yours. The reason why they lost to you is that their will is not firm enough. They don't have your strong will in the face of danger. Li Yundong suddenly understood. Oh, I understand what you mean. Can this kind of will be understood as the Taoist heart? When fighting, You must guard your Taoist heart and not let others break it. Ziyuan smiled slightly. You can say that. Li Yundong laughed. I see. Go on. Ziyuan continued. It's not necessarily a good thing to cultivate in the secular world all your life. Similarly, it's not necessarily a good thing to cultivate in the secular world all your life. Like a diligent and inquisitive student, Li Yundong asked, why is that? Isn't it better to temper one's willpower in the secular world? To temper one's willpower until it's like steel? Ziyuan sighed and said, Jia Yi of the Han Dynasty once said in a poem about Chu Yuan, heaven and earth are the furnace, creation is the work, yin and yang are the carbon, and all things are the copper. Watch net. 7K. OM. From this sentence, you can see the difficulty of entering the world to cultivate. Li Yundong seemed to have touched something in his heart, but it was a little unclear. It was vague and hazy. He said, go on, I'm listening. Ziyuan explained. This sentence fully explains the difficulty of entering the secular world to cultivate. You see, heaven and earth are like a big furnace. Everything in this world is the copper in this furnace, being burned and roasted by it. You have to know that if you stay in this furnace for a long time, under the influence of fate, the copper will be burned and turn into other shapes. Yin and yang refer to our human bodies. If we are carbon, we can't avoid the fate of being burned and roasted. Li Yundong's eyes lit up. He said, I understand. You mean if you enter the secular world too deeply, it will be easy for you to be dragged down by the things in the secular world. If you change, it will affect your own cultivation. Ziyuan nodded and praised. You're right. This principle is the same as the cultivation law of Dharma, wealth, companion and earth tools. If you don't have money, you have to think about daily necessities all day long. How can you calm down and cultivate? So if you stay in a company or other places where you have to fight and scheme all day long, how can you cultivate? Cultivation is not about jumping out of this world and looking down at it from a high vantage point. It's about being in it and turning yourself into a piece of good copper and iron. In this big furnace of heaven and earth, you can be tempered and forged into the best equipment. Li Yundong drew inferences and said, so the school is the best place in this world. It doesn't have the intrigue and dirty things in other places. It's relatively pure and quiet, and there's a lot of information to read. There's plenty of time, and you can move freely so. Ziyuan didn't wait for him to finish, and continued with a smile. So it's good to cultivate in the ivory tower. After that, she suddenly had an idea and smiled. By the way, there will be an acquaintance coming to your school this year. Li Yundong suddenly became curious. A freshman? An acquaintance? I know him. Who is it? Before Ziyuan could say anything, she heard the sound of someone opening the door with a key. Ziyuan immediately laughed and turned her head to look at the door. Li Yundong also turned around and looked at the door. The two of them looked over and saw that it was Ruan Hongling who had walked in. Ruan Hongling was carrying a few plastic bags in her hands, which contained all kinds of vegetables, fruits, and daily necessities. When she saw Li Yundong and Ziyuan, she was stunned and then overjoyed. But when she was overjoyed, she was surprised to find that Ziyuan was leaning against Li Yundong intimately. She immediately said in surprise and doubt, You, what are you doing? Ziyuan knew her shimmy very well. She rolled her eyes at Hongling and said, What do you think? Only then did Ruan Hongling see the hair on the ground at Li Yundong's feet. She immediately bared her teeth and said, I just cleaned the room. Why is it so dirty again? Although Li Yundong had always had conflicts with Ruan Hongling, especially before he left, he had a big quarrel with her. But after 2 months, no matter how big his resentment was, it had dissipated a lot. Although he couldn't greet this girl with a smile, he could still say a few words to her normally. Go to the internet. Did you clean this room? Li Yundong couldn't help asking. Could it be that you cleaned it? Ruan Hongling snorted coldly. Li Yundong didn't care about it, but she still bore a grudge in her heart. Only then did Li Yundong notice that the windows and glass in the room had been replaced. It was not as drafty as before. He couldn't help but sigh and thank her. Thank you so much. I haven't been back for 2 months. But this room hasn't been covered in dust. Wan Hongling snorted, turned her head to one side, and said indifferently, as long as some people don't think I'm meddlesome. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. Why is this girl so vengeful? Zi Yuan turned her head and glared at Wan Hongling. Wan Hongling also made a face and carried the plastic bag into the kitchen. I guess you will be back in a few days, so I've bought the food. Li Yundong, although you are very annoying, you still cook well. Why don't you make a few dishes later? And I'll reluctantly give you face and have a meal as a thank you. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. You really should be a businessman. You won't lose out no matter what. You've taken advantage of me, yet you still act like a good girl. Zi Yuan also smiled and said, don't bother with her. She's just a child. She's not bad at heart, but a little willful. Wan Hongling poked her head out of the kitchen and protested loudly. I'm not a child anymore. I'm a college student. Zi Yuan laughed and said, you'll be a college student in a few days. Li Yundong turned his head and asked, you're going to college? Which school? Zi Yuan was cutting his hair. Just as she was about to cut the scissors, she saw Li Yundong suddenly turn his face away. Fortunately, she didn't cut a big gap. Zi Yuan suddenly patted Li Yundong on the head angrily and said, turn your head. Li Yundong immediately turned his head obediently and looked straight ahead. Wan Hongling chuckled and teased, hey, you're being henpecked so soon? Hearing this, Zi Yuan's cheeks suddenly turned red, and she glared at Wan Hongling angrily. Li Yundong also coughed, looking embarrassed and embarrassed. For a moment he didn't dare to say another word or move. Although Zi Yuan didn't throw away Li Yundong's half-cut hair because of this sentence, her movements had become stiff and unnatural. After she finally finished, she threw down the scissors and said, go and see for yourself. After that, she ran into the kitchen to teach Wan Hongling a lesson. Li Yundong was not in the mood to look in the mirror because of what Wan Hongling had said. He sat there in a daze for a while, then went back to his bedroom to look in the full-length mirror. With just one glance, he couldn't help but be amazed by Zi Yuan's haircutting skills. Zi Yuan didn't cut Li Yundong's hair very short. She just cut off a lot of his messy hair, making his hair elegant and chic, and his whole temperament became ethereal. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh. This fairy is really a fairy. She can cut such an elegant and classical aura with just a haircut. I admire her. He smiled and looked carefully in the mirror for a while. But suddenly he saw the pillow on the bed and the money bank next to it in the mirror. Li Yundong was stunned. He found that the money bank was upside down. In the past his head was up, but now it was down. A trace of displeasure flashed through Li Yundong's heart. Why did Wan Hongling touch my things again? He thought to himself. I must tell her not to touch my things later. Li Yundong thought to himself. He walked to the bedside and picked up the money bank. But as soon as he picked it up, he found a note under it. Li Yundong picked up the note curiously and glanced at it. He saw 3 big words written on it. I miss you. Li Yundong's eyes suddenly widened. He was so excited that his hands were trembling, and his chest was about to explode with joy. He rushed out of the bedroom like crazy and shouted in the living room like a demon. She came back, the girl came back. Wan Hongling and Zi Yuan, who were busy cooking in the kitchen, poked their heads out at the same time and looked at Li Yundong in confusion. They looked at each other, and Wan Hongling muttered, What's wrong with him? Zi Yuan shook her head. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be the first time he's gone crazy. When Wan Hongling heard this, she immediately smiled ambiguously and said, Shiji, what else have you seen? Zi Yuan glared at her angrily. Shut up. Li Yundong was shouting and dancing in the living room. As soon as he saw Wan Hongling and Zi Yuan, he immediately rushed over, shaking the note in his hand excitedly, and said loudly, She came back, she came to see me. Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling's eyes followed the shaking note in Li Yundong's hand. No matter how they looked at it, they could only see 3 words. I miss you. Wan Hongling asked in confusion. Who came to see you? Li Yundong shouted with ecstasy. Su Chan, my girl, she came back to see me. Wan Hongling immediately retracted her head with a disapproving look on her face. She wanted to give Li Yundong a blow, but seeing his ecstatic expression, She couldn't bear it. However, she didn't want him to be too arrogant, so she couldn't help saying, "Humph, who knows if she wrote it?" Li Yundong said with a serious face, "It must be her." Wan Hongling said unconvinced, "How do you know? Maybe it was written by a thief." Li Yundong was in a good mood at this time, so he didn't argue with her. He just glanced at Wan Hongling and Ziyuan proudly and snorted. "People who have never been in love won't know. Humph, of course, a shrewish woman like you, no matter how beautiful you are, probably can't find a boyfriend. You don't understand. This is called having a telepathic connection. I know it was written by her, so it must have been written by her." Wan Hongling was a little driven crazy by Li Yundong's words. B****. It's not that I haven't been in love. It's that I don't want to be in love. It's not that I can't find one. It's that I don't want to find one. Ziyuan couldn't help but be lost in thought. She looked at Li Yundong's ecstatic and uncontrollable appearance and said to herself in confusion, "It's just 3 words. Can you be so happy when you love someone?" She and Wan Hongling were in a daze, and Li Yundong was going crazy, but Li Yundong rushed to the balcony. He put his hands around his mouth to make a trumpet and leaned out. Li Yundong took a deep breath and shouted, "I miss you too." As he shouted, his voice traveled through the boundless sky and into the distance. It seemed as if it would travel to the ends of the earth and would not dissipate for a long time. Li Yundong looked at the distant sky. The little girl's voice and smile seemed to be dancing in front of him. He unconsciously burst into tears and said foolishly, "Girl, I miss you too. /om/." Chapter 196. Go to watch net. Li Yundong's shout seemed to have reached the distant Dongwu city. Su Chan, who was meditating and practicing qi at home, suddenly opened her eyes. She stood up in surprise and joy, walked out of the room, opened the window, and looked around. Watch net. 7K. But apart from the antique bluestone pavement, the white walls and black tiles, and the fashionably dressed passers-by, there was nothing else. Ao Wushuang's unhappy voice came from the room. "Chaner, what's wrong with you again? I heard Li Yundong calling me," Su Chan said as she returned to her room. Ao Wushuang sighed and couldn't help rubbing her temples. "Are you done? Didn't you promise me that you would cultivate in peace after coming back? Look at you, you haven't made any progress in the past 2 months. Li Yundong has succeeded in the Zhuji phase in just 2 months. Don't you feel ashamed?" Su Chan giggled. "What's there to be embarrassed about? The stronger he becomes, the happier I will be." Ao Wushuang couldn't help but say angrily, "Chaner, come over here, meditate and practice your qi." Su Chan saw that her master was angry, so she didn't dare to neglect him. She obediently returned to the futon, sat down and muttered, "I just heard it." Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. "How could you hear me from hundreds of kilometers away? Do you think he can transmit his voice from 1,000 miles away?" Su Chan raised her head and snorted, "I have a telepathic connection with him." Ao Wushuang was flustered and exasperated. Just as she was about to reprimand him, there was a knock on the door. Then a figure came in. He was short and thin, with a face full of wrinkles. He was an old man. The old man's eyes were lowered, and he was wearing a gray running coat and a pair of navy blue cloth shoes. His hands were tucked into his sleeves, and he wore a black skullcap on his head. Coupled with the 2 thin and long beards on his face, he looked somewhat comical, like an old landlord in the old society. Su Chan turned her head and suddenly jumped up in fright. She stammered, "Grandmaster." When Ao Wushuang saw this person, she immediately stood up and nodded slightly. She looked a little surprised and vigilant as she said, "Uncle Master, why are you here?" The leader of the Fox Zen school walked into the room and looked around. He saw that the furnishings in the room were simple. Except for a square table, 2 stools and 2 futons, there was nothing else. "Watch net." He sighed and said, "Wushuang, why are there only 2 chairs here? Even if there are guests, there's no way to sit." Ao Wushuang smiled faintly and said, "Will there be guests here? Shouldn't others be hiding from me?" The sect leader sighed. He walked to the stool and sat cross-legged on it. After he sat down, He took out a purple tobacco pipe with a goldfish inlaid on it. He took out a jade opium pipe and filled it with tobacco leaves. He didn't light up the pipe, he just took 2 puffs, and the tobacco in the pipe ignited on its own. Almost 10 years have passed. Are you still holding a grudge? The sect leader spat out a smoke ring. He watched the smoke ring float up and slowly disperse. Let bygones be bygones. The affairs of the world are like smoke. How can they not disperse? Ao Wushuang's expression was surprisingly cold. Uncle Master, with your temper, I don't think you would come here to tell me this, would you? The sect leader smiled slightly. It seems that you still hate me for driving you out of the sect. Ao Wushuang sneered coldly. I wouldn't dare. How could I dare to hate the leader of the Fox Zen school, Lu Yi, who is known as the Flying Fox? I'm already a wandering ghost. If I hold a grudge against the sect leader of my own clan, wouldn't that be courting death? Lu Yi laughed, and the wrinkles on his face suddenly became very deep. He tapped the ash in the pipe and said, You still say that you don't hate me? Look at you, your words are full of resentment. I drove you out of the sect in order to protect you. I believe that with your intelligence, you will definitely understand. Ao Wushuang's eyes suddenly became vicissitudes of life. She sighed and said, It's one thing to understand, and it's another thing to forgive. Tell me, don't beat around the bush. You don't come here for nothing. What are you doing here? Lu Yi sighed and said, I came here to tell you to go back and have a look when you have time. To see the net. 7K. If one day you want to go back and have a look, you won't be able to see it. Ao Wushuang suddenly frowned. What do you mean by that? Lu Yi was not in a hurry to speak. He took a few puffs of his cigarette and stood up from the stool. He slowly put away his pipe, walked slowly to the door with his hands behind his back, and stopped. He said, The 6 great sects unanimously believe that our Fox Zen school has swallowed Renyuan Jindan. They will join forces to attack our Fox Zen school in at least 2 months, and at most half a year. You are the best master in our Fox Zen school. It's up to you whether you will come back or not. With that, he walked out of the door. Ao Wushuang couldn't help but shout. Why did you say that you didn't steal it? Did I steal it? Lu Yi stopped, turned around, and smiled with a face full of sarcasm and ridicule. Is it any use? Since when would those righteous sects listen to us demons and devils? Isn't it just a matter of a few words for them to kill us? Besides, although you have been expelled from the sect, even if you turn into ashes, others will still think that you are a member of the Fox Zen school. Because no matter how much you change your appearance, you can't change the fact that you are a 7-tailed divine fox. Ao Wushuang was silent. After a moment of silence, she said, How can we resist the joint attack of the 6 great sects? Why don't you let the sisters of our sect hide first? Lu Yi laughed and said, Our Fox Zen school has had a history of more than 1,200 years, since it was founded by Ancestor Rock in the period of Emperor Xianzong of Tang Dynasty. Over the years, there have been so many sects that have wanted to destroy our Fox Zen school. But what has been the result? Although we have declined now, if they attack us, we will run away. The next time they attack, we will run away again. If this goes on, where will we find shelter in the world? After that, Lu Yi snorted and walked out of the door with his hands behind his back. His voice came from afar. You have 2 months to think about it. Ao Wushuang sat in the room in a daze for a while. She suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, Chaner, prepare the luggage. Su Chan answered, and went back to the room. She tidied up her clothes a little, and dragged her suitcase out. She said, Master, are we going back to the sect? As she spoke, there was an indescribable excitement and joy in the little girl's words. Ao Wushuang glanced at her, and couldn't help but show a trace of pity and love in her eyes. When she had taken Su Chan out of the sect, Su Chan was only a little over 6 years old. She was still a little girl, and her impression of the sect was very faint. Ao Wushuang sighed in her heart and said, It's not us, it's just me. Su Chan was shocked. Master, aren't you going to take me back to the sect? Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, No, it's very dangerous this time. Our Fox Zen school is even in danger of being destroyed. It's too dangerous for you to follow me. Go find your lover. He will take good care of you. As long as he gets through the divine tribulation, and your identity is not exposed, you will be fine. Su Chan's face was surprisingly firm. She shook her head and said, Master, if the sect is gone, so what if I'm left alone? Let me go with you. I have some responsibility for this matter. Ao Wushuang said angrily, Why do you always have to go against me? Haven't you been clamoring to go back to Yundong all day long? Now that I've let you go, why don't you want to go? Su Chan said, Master, you brought me up when I was a child. You taught me how to read and how to cultivate magic. If I run away alone at the slightest danger, wouldn't I be the most ungrateful person in the world? If Yundong finds out, he will also be angry and abandon me. If I can abandon you today, won't I be able to abandon him tomorrow? Ao Wushuang laughed, feeling a little gratified and a little helpless. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly looked behind Su Chan and said in surprise, Why are you here? After that, she was about to hit Su Chan's neck with her palm. But before she could do anything, Su Chan seemed to have seen through her thoughts. Not only did she not look back, but she jumped a few meters away from Ao Wushuang and said warily, Master, do you want to knock me out and go back to the Fox Zen school alone? Ao Wushuang saw that the girl usually looked careless and a little silly, but in fact, she was as smart and cunning as herself. She smiled helplessly and said, Forget it, let's go. You win. The girl still refused to approach. Her eyes rolled around, and her face was full of suspicion. You can't lie to me. Ao Wushuang looked at her angrily and said, Don't talk nonsense. Follow me. With that, she dragged her luggage and turned to leave. The girl hurriedly followed behind. As she chased after her, she said, Oh, Master, wait for me. After catching up with Ao Wushuang, she said, Master, can I tell Yundong about this? After all, he is the successor of the Jindan stage. He can help. Ao Wushuang snorted coldly and said, Will he? Our Fox Zen school has a bad reputation now. Even the slightly sanctimonious cultivators are afraid of us. Moreover, if the 6 great sects find out that he has swallowed the Jindan, they will catch him and stew him. Su Chan quickly said, No, he knows who I am, and he has never despised me. Ao Wushuang still replied coldly, Oh, however, even if he comes, it's useless. He has just reached the Zhuji phase, and has no magic at all. If he comes, he will die. Su Chan pursed her lips and said, Oh. She didn't say anything else. Almost at the same time, in the distant Tianan city, Li Yundong was pointing at the heavy fan of 7 treasures and said in surprise, What? Tomorrow is the first day of school. You want me to carry this thing to school? Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong and said, Yes, this fan of 7 treasures is a high-grade magical item. It has its own spiritual magic power. As long as it is connected with its master's mind, it can be controlled by Shintong to display its powerful power. Only if you carry it with you all day long, can it slowly become familiar with your aura. In this way, you can get twice the result with half the effort in the future. Moreover, do you dare to leave such a precious magical item at home? Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong with a smile. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly. He looked up and down at the fan of 7 treasures, which was nearly as tall as a person, and weighed more than 50 kilograms. He muttered in his heart, It's too exaggerated to carry such a big guy to school. /om/. Chapter 197. Go to Watch Network. It was another new semester. Go to Watch. There was a big difference between the beginning of school after the summer vacation and the beginning of school after the winter vacation. The difference was that the former, for the freshmen, would usher in the most important and unforgettable period of their lives. They would change from high school students to college students. Many of them would start to skip classes, hang out in internet cafes, pick up girls, or be bookworms in the ivory tower. For the older students, the latter, after the summer vacation, they would be able to see many beautiful women and handsome boys who had just entered the school. As the backbone of the student union, Feng Na would naturally welcome the freshmen every year. Moreover, as a senior sister who had just been promoted to a senior, and a strong competitor for the next president of the student union, it was naturally impossible for her to escape this kind of work, which was similar to pulling able-bodied men. At the Tiananmen railway station, the freshman welcome stations of each school were lined up one by one, forming a square formation. The beautiful girls and handsome boys of each school were warmly greeting every freshman who came to register at their respective stations. It was like a unique scenery in the railway station square. "Nana, give me a bottle of water." Chung Chung stretched out her hand to Feng Na while fanning herself with a small plastic fan. Feng Na took out a bottle of water from the mineral water box at her feet, threw it over and said, "How many is this?" 138. "Oh, I'm so tired." Feng Na smiled as she sent a freshman away. Her face immediately collapsed. She gulped down a mouthful of water, then wiped her mouth and said, "F***ck. This year's freshmen are all perverts. They all stare at my chest." Feng Na couldn't help laughing and scolding. "Come on, you really don't take advantage of it. Who told you to wear this kind of low-cut sweatshirt? Isn't it just for the perverts to see?" Chung Chung rolled her eyes. "Even so, you can't just stuff your eyeballs into them." Feng Na was about to speak, but she heard a panting voice next to her. "Feng Na, water." Feng Na turned her head and saw Wu Hui coming back, sweating all over, shouting at her. Feng Na picked up a bottle of water and threw it over. She said with a smile, "Did you send it to the train? Is it heavy?" Wu Hui unscrewed the lid, gulped down a few mouthfuls, and then poured the water on his head. He put his hands on his hips and grumbled, "These freshmen are too exaggerated. They bring everything. I can tolerate it if they bring computers, but there are actually people who bring televisions. The most exaggerated thing is that there are people who bring electric fans. My God, my back almost broke from exhaustion. If there's more luggage later, you guys go and carry it yourselves. I can't carry it anymore." Although Feng Na didn't have a good relationship with Wu Hui, and she didn't really like his character, they were classmates at the same time, and they were all here to help. She didn't want to give him the cold shoulder, so she smiled and said, "As the saying goes, the capable do more work. You're the only boy here. Who else can do it if not you? Besides, it's normal for a new student to have more things." Just as she finished speaking, she heard a mischievous voice from the side. "Okay, I heard you guys badmouthing our new student." Feng Na, Wu Hui, and Chung Chung all turned their heads and saw a girl wearing a light yellow dress and a milky white woven straw hat blinking at them. Watch net. Color *** literature _learning %super #speed. Update. The girl was very beautiful. She had big eyes, long eyelashes and snow-white skin. She was about 1.65 meters tall and had a well-proportioned figure. She was very attractive. Wu Hui's eyes lit up, and he immediately said with a flattering smile, "You flatter me. Are you a freshman? What's his name? Which department?" The girl smiled and said, "I'm Jiang Xiuxiu, majoring in film and television performance." Jiang Xiuxiu, Jiang as in Chiang Kai-shek, Xiu as in Xiucai, right? Chung Chung looked up. Jiang Xiuxiu corrected her. "It's Jiang as in Jiang Qin, and Xiu as in a feast for the eyes." Chung Chung felt a chill in her heart. This girl is indeed a film and television performance student. She's so F***ing arrogant. When Wu Hui saw the beautiful girl, he immediately became attentive. He took the initiative to run to Jiang Xiuxiu and help her carry her luggage. Feng Na couldn't help but tease him. "Aren't you exhausted?" Wu Hui smiled sheepishly. He didn't respond to Feng Na. Instead, he bent over to pick up the two large suitcases beside Jiang Xiuxiu. Jiang Xiuxiu pursed her lips and said with a smile, "My suitcases are very heavy. Be careful." Wu Hui laughed and waved his hand proudly. "Don't worry, I'm the sports committee member of the student union." After that, he even made a bodybuilder's pose. Feng Na and Chung Chung looked at each other and couldn't stand it. Jiang Xiuxiu giggled and watched him make a fool of himself. After Wu Hui finished his pose, he bent down to carry his suitcases. As soon as he lifted them, his body suddenly sank, and he almost broke his waist. The two big suitcases didn't move at all. Wu Hui's expression suddenly changed. He stammered. What are you carrying in these? Bricks. Why are they so heavy? Feng Na also walked over curiously and tried to lift them, only to feel that the suitcases were like a big weight, not moving at all. Feng Na secretly stuck out her tongue and smiled at Wu Hui. Sports committee member, it's up to you now. In front of a beautiful woman, Wu Hui didn't dare to lose face. He secretly gritted his teeth, exerted his strength, and forcibly lifted the 2 suitcases. However, after taking only 2 steps, he had to put them down. Panting, he waved his hand and said, No, one at a time. Cheng Cheng laughed and said, You're so stupid. The suitcases can be dragged. Can't you just drag them all the way? Wu Hui suddenly slapped his forehead. Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Cheng Cheng muttered in a low voice. Nonsense, you just want to show off in front of a beautiful woman. Your IQ is in the negative. Feng Na accompanied Jiang Xiuxiu, while Wu Hui dragged the 2 heavy suitcases to the school's minibus. Wu Hui gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and forcibly carried the suitcases into the bus. It was only a few steps, but he was so tired that he almost spat out his tongue. By the time he carried the second suitcase on the bus, he was already panting like a bull. He couldn't help but think, I have to carry this suitcase off the bus and carry it to the girls' dormitory for her. It's fine if it's on the 1st floor, but if it's on the 5th floor. Oh my God, won't it kill me? Thinking of this, Wu Hui's face suddenly turned ashen. He didn't even have the heart to show off in front of the beautiful woman. All he could think about was how not to embarrass himself. Go to Kanban. 7K. Feng Na seemed to know what he was thinking, so she said, Wu Hui, you stay here to welcome the new students. I'll accompany Jiang Xiuxiu back. When we get there, I'll call a few boys to help her move it. If you're not here, Cheng Cheng, and I won't be able to move the things, right? Hearing this, Wu Hui immediately nodded his head like a rattle drum. Good idea, good idea. After saying this, he turned around and walked away without looking at Jiang Xiuxiu. Jiang Xiuxiu watched his back as he left, a smile at the corner of her mouth. This senior is quite fun, and he's also quite handsome, she said in a low voice. For some reason, she suddenly thought of Li Yundong, who she hadn't seen for more than 2 months. Is he okay? I haven't seen him for more than 2 months. Has anything changed? Feng Na was lost in thought for a moment. Seeing her in a daze, Jiang Xiuxiu waved her hand in front of her eyes and said with a smile, Senior, what are you thinking about? After that, she said with an ambiguous expression on her face, Are you thinking about the senior just now? Feng Na snorted and said grumpily, Why would I be thinking about him? Jiang Xiuxiu was an easygoing person. She smiled and bumped Feng Na with her shoulder. Senior, don't be shy. Feng Na and Jiang Xiuxiu sat down on the bus. Feng Na smiled and said, It's really not him. Besides, I already have someone I like. Jiang Xiuxiu opened her eyes wide and asked, Who is it? Feng Na couldn't help feeling sweet and sour at the thought of Li Yundong. She said with a myriad of emotions, You don't know him. Don't ask. Jiang Xiuxiu nodded and sat in her seat without saying anything. The 2 of them waited for a while. Seeing that there were no other freshmen coming, Feng Na said to the driver, Mr. Zhao, drive her back first. The driver responded, and the minibus slowly drove out of the square and merged into the traffic. After nearly half an hour, the minibus finally drove to the gate of Tiannan University. The driver saw that the 2 girls couldn't move the luggage, so he went to help. The 3 of them worked hard to get the luggage down. Seeing that the driver was so tired that he couldn't even straighten his back, Feng Na didn't want to bother him anymore. Mr. Zhao, I don't want to bother you here. You go to the bus station first. I'll call some boys to help. Mr. Zhao's eyes were fixed on the 2 heavy suitcases, which looked like they were stuffed with stones. He didn't dare to show off. Okay, he said and drove away. Feng Na said to Jiang Xiuxiu, Wait here. I'll call some boys. Seeing Feng Na running toward the campus, Jiang Xiuxiu couldn't help but mutter, Aren't there boys here? Why are you going there to call them? After that, she saw a boy passing by not far away. She subconsciously shouted, Hey handsome. The boy was wearing a white Armani long-sleeve casual shirt and a pair of black trousers of unknown brand. He was wearing a pair of sneakers and carrying a long, thick, and long object wrapped in black cloth on his back. She didn't know what it was. The boy ignored her and walked forward. Jiang Xiuxiu was a little stunned. She couldn't help but shout again. Handsome, I'm calling you. Her voice was quite loud. The boys around the school, whether ugly or handsome, all turned their heads to look at her. However, the boy didn't turn his head. Jiang Xiuxiu was so angry that she couldn't help but rush to the boy, grab his hand and shouted, Hey, I'm calling you. But as soon as she grabbed his hand, the boy seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. He quickly stepped forward and dodged her hand. Then he turned around and looked at Jiang Xiuxiu. Jiang Xiuxiu was about to open her mouth to speak, but she suddenly saw the boy. Her heart suddenly thumped. The boy was about 1.75 meters tall. His skin was a little tanned, but he exuded a healthy and masculine aura. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes, which were bright and full of expression. His nose was tall and straight like a mountain, proud and straight. His lips were firm and strong, and he exuded an aura of determination and confidence. Jiang Xiuxiu didn't know how many boys had been around her since she was a child, but she had never seen such a handsome and masculine boy. She was tongue-tied for a moment and just stared at the boy in front of her. She was usually a glib talker, but she couldn't say a word. Jiang Xiuxiu only felt that the boy just stood there, but he had a temperament that was as still as a pine tree and as tall as a mountain. This was a temperament that most men in this world didn't have. Only those who had really experienced great storms could have such a temperament. The boy looked at Jiang Xiuxiu and smiled slightly. What's the matter? When the boy smiled, Jiang Xiuxiu felt her heart beating wildly. She said, I want to ask you to help me carry my luggage. The boy smiled and said, A freshman? Jiang Xiuxiu was a person who could grasp the right to speak no matter where she was. But at this time, she couldn't help following the boy's topic. She nodded foolishly and said, Yes. The boy nodded and walked to her suitcase. He pointed at the two suitcases and said, These two. Jiang Xiuxiu couldn't help but nod and immediately said in a panic, Wait a minute, it's very heavy. I'll call 2 more boys to help, or you won't be able to carry it. As she said this, she ran to the side to find other boys. But when the other boys looked in the direction she was pointing at, they immediately laughed and said, With him, what else do we need to do? Jiang Xiuxiu turned her head in surprise, only to see that the boy had already carried 2 suitcases in his hands and was striding toward the school. Jiang Xiuxiu was so shocked that her eyeballs almost fell out. She quickly ran up to the boy and said as if she had seen King Kong, You can carry it? The boy tilted his head slightly, looked at her and smiled. I think I can. Jiang Xiuxiu's eyes widened. Isn't it heavy? The boy smiled slightly. It's not bad. Jiang Xiuxiu didn't say anything. She didn't know how many heroes had been killed along the way with these 2 suitcases. Many boys who wanted to come up to her were scared away by these 2 suitcases. The boy in front of her actually picked up the suitcases effortlessly, and his expression didn't change at all along the way. Is this guy a monster? Jiang Xiuxiu muttered to herself. She reported. After the dormitory was assigned, the boy sent her luggage to the girls' dormitory on the 3rd floor. Jiang Xiuxiu found that when some of the senior sisters in the dormitory saw the boy, their eyes suddenly lit up with admiration and worship. They stood by the stairs and looked at him, as if they were paying attention to him. They didn't even dare to speak loudly, just whispering to each other. It seems that I accidentally found a big shot in this school? Jiang Xiuxiu muttered to herself. The boy put the suitcases away and didn't stay. He didn't come to talk to her like other boys and get close to her. He just said, Is this the place? I've put the luggage for you. I'll go first. After that, he turned around and went out the door. Jiang Xiuxiu was stunned. No way. So cool. Wasn't this too cool without a conscience? He didn't even give me a chance to ask for his name, phone number, and QQ? Thinking of this, she rushed out of the door and chased after the boy all the way to the dormitory building. She shouted, Hey, I still don't know your name. The boy didn't look back. He waved his hand and said, My name is Lei Feng. Jiang Xiuxiu suddenly spat. Bah! She was staring at the boy's back in a daze when she heard Feng Na's surprised voice. Jiang Xiuxiu, what are you doing here? Where's your luggage? Jiang Xiuxiu turned her head and saw two strong boys standing next to Feng Na. They were looking at her in surprise. As soon as Jiang Xiuxiu saw Feng Na, she immediately grabbed her and pointed at the boy's back. Hey, do you know this boy? Is he from our school? What's his name? Who is he? Chapter 198. Go to watch net. Looking at the boy's back as he walked away, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She felt that this back was so similar to the boy she missed, but when she took a closer look, she felt that it was different. Go to Kanban. 1-1. Although the height and back were somewhat similar, she felt that there was something different about the way he walked and his bearing. For a moment, she didn't dare to recognize him, so she smiled and said to Jiang Xiuxiu, I don't know. Maybe he's a freshman. Jiang Xiuxiu's face was full of disappointment. Looking at the boy's back as he walked away, she thought to herself, it doesn't matter. I'll find him for you sooner or later. Ever since Li Yundong's trip to Tibet and the incident with Meiduo, he had been no longer as casual as before when dealing with girls. He didn't even tell Jiang Xiuxiu his name, so he didn't even tell her his name. Carrying the fan of 7 treasures on his back, Li Yundong went to his classroom. At this time, there was almost no one in the classroom, which surprised him. But on second thought, he remembered that today was the day for new students to register, and classes would not start until tomorrow. He smiled, carried the fan of 7 treasures on his back, and went to the school library. Fortunately, the school library was open today. Li Yundong applied for a library card and walked in. As soon as he entered, Li Yundong first used the computer to search for religious books. He was surprised to find that the library really had a lot of books. There were hundreds of religious books. After searching for the results, Li Yundong chose 2 books, Diamond Sutra and Flower of Dharma Sutra, and then borrowed them from the librarian. The librarian was an old man in his 70s. As soon as he saw that Li Yundong wanted to borrow the 2 books, he immediately picked up the presbyopic glasses, hanging in front of his neck, and looked Li Yundong up and down carefully. Then he sighed and said, It's rare for young people to borrow these kinds of books these days. As he spoke, he walked to the bookshelf, searched for a while, and then took out the 2 books. Because almost no one paid attention to them, the 2 books looked as good as new. The old man clapped his hands and said, This is the first time this book has been borrowed since it entered the library. Hey young man, can you understand it? Li Yundong laughed and said, Not necessarily. Let's take a look first. The old man smiled. Don't think that I'm too talkative. If you don't understand, don't break the book. After saying that, he seemed to feel that there was something wrong with his words and said, Of course, even if you can understand it, don't break the book. Li Yundong chuckled and said, No, teacher. I will cherish my books. Watch net. 7K. O-/. The old man nodded with a smile and watched Li Yundong walk out of the library with the 2 books. He sighed softly and said, It's really not easy. There are actually young people who are willing to calm down and read such books. Li Yundong opened the Vajra Sutra. After reading a few pages, he found that the book was not as profound and terrifying as he had imagined. In the beginning, there were many Buddhist stories, full of spirituality and wisdom, which were easy to understand. In the middle, there was a dialogue between Subhuti and Buddha. The 2 of them were like in the Yellow Emperor's canon, similar to the question and answer between the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and Qibo. Although it was written in classical Chinese, Li Yundong could understand it. Moreover, with the Buddhist stories at the front of the book as a foreshadowing and guidance, he read it with relish. Most importantly, if Li Yundong had read this kind of book in the past, he would have been drowsy and annoyed at the first page. But now that he was a cultivator, he had some understanding of cultivation. Moreover, he had read the Mahamudra Secret Method Sutra, which also contained a lot of theoretical knowledge of Buddhist scriptures. He had also practiced the Mahamudra himself, so he had some enlightenment in his heart. Li Yundong was originally talented and intelligent, and he had some enlightenment in his heart. At this time, when he looked at this Buddhist classic again, he suddenly felt as if a string had been touched in his heart, and he understood something. But after he understood something, the more he felt that there was more he didn't understand, the more he read on greedily. On the way back, Li Yundong kept reading the book. After entering the house, he sat in the living room, facing the east. He sat cross-legged, and was so engrossed in reading that he didn't even notice Yuan Hongling and Ziyuan entering his house. Ziyuan opened the door, and saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged in the living room. He was holding a classic in his hand, and reading it attentively. Beside him was another classic, on which were written 3 golden ancient seal scripts. Dharma Hua Sutra. Ziyuan turned around, and gestured to Yuan Hongling to keep quiet, then quietly left with her. Yuan Hongling asked in confusion, "Sister Ziyuan, isn't he practicing Taoist magic? Why is he reading Buddhist classics?" After a moment of silence, Ziyuan said, "Maybe he wants to practice both Buddhism and Taoism." Yuan Hongling snickered. Since ancient times, how many people have wanted to practice both Buddhism and Taoism? But only Lu Huayang and Wu Shouyang can be called masters. The others have neglected the essentials to pursue trifles, like picking up sesame seeds and losing watermelons. Does he also want to follow in their footsteps? Ziyuan also felt that Yuan Hongling's words were reasonable. After all, since Buddhism was introduced into China in the later Han Dynasty, there had been all kinds of open and secret struggles with Taoism. This kind of struggle reached its peak in the later Tang Dynasty, under the instigation of the mystical silver fox. From then on, Buddhism and Taoism were at odds. Watch net. 7K. Oh. Hong. Oh, in the past 2,000 years, countless Buddhist cultivators had wanted to learn Taoist magic, and countless Taoist cultivators had wanted to learn Buddhist magic, but almost all of them had failed. The Buddhist and Taoist sects had strict barriers and ravines. How could it be so easy to practice dual cultivation? In the past 2,000 years, only a handful of people had been able to do it. Could Li Yundong do it? Thinking of this, Ziyuan said, "Don't say that. Even if you practice Taoist skills, you can also read the classics of Buddhism. After all, it's beneficial to learn from all kinds of schools, and learn from the strengths of all schools. Moreover, Buddhism and Taoism also have something in common, so it's not a big deal to read them." This time, he went to Tibet and traveled thousands of miles. Not only has his strength increased a lot, but his knowledge has also increased a lot. Now it's time to read thousands of books. The two of them were whispering outside the door. Unknowingly, Li Yundong had already finished reading the contents of the Vajra Sutra, where Subhuti and the Buddha talked about the emptiness of all living beings and the emptiness of Dharma. After reading it, Li Yundong sat on the spot in a daze. The contents of the Vajra Sutra kept replaying in his mind. He felt that he had understood it, but when he was asked to say it out, he seemed to be a little unable to express it. It was as if he was looking at flowers in the fog, separated by a layer of invisible gauze. It was hazy. Li Yundong thought for a while, then stopped thinking about it. He put down the sutra in his hand, and went to read the second book, the sutra. However, Li Yundong didn't know that his behavior coincided with the Taoist mentality of cultivating freely, and it also coincided with the Buddhist principle of cultivating without any hindrance. If it had been someone else, they might have had to figure out this ideal and figure it out. If they didn't understand it, they would not give up. But this kind of behavior was exactly like Qigong deviation. Li Yundong didn't have enough knowledge now, so it was impossible for him to understand the truth behind it. If he forced himself to think about it, it would be like asking a person with only 10 kilograms of strength to lift 100 kilograms of weight. Not only would he not be able to lift it, but he would also hurt his own body. Su Chan said that he had a first-class cultivation temperament, and this was the reason. He never forced himself to do something that was difficult. After more than an hour, Li Yundong finished reading the sutra. When he came to his senses, it was already past 12 o'clock. He casually had lunch, then carried the fan of 7 treasures and the books to school. When he arrived at the school library, the old librarian saw Li Yundong walking back with the 2 books. He sighed in his heart. Sure enough, these 2 books are not for young people like me. Li Yundong came up to him and said, I'm here to return the books, teacher. The old man sighed in his heart and took the 2 books. You can't understand them? Li Yundong smiled and said, Not bad. The old man squinted at Li Yundong and thought to himself, Still trying to be brave? Humph. Young people pretend to know what they don't know. He pretended to be intentional and asked casually, What is the color, fragrance, and touch? Li Yundong also answered casually, In addition, the 6 realms. The old man was stunned, as if he couldn't believe his ears. He asked again, Then what is the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind? Li Yundong smiled and said, These are the 6 realms. After answering, he didn't wait for the old man to ask again. He continued to say, The root and dust are opposite, and the 6 realms arise. The so-called eye, ear, and sense are the 18 realms. Not only are the 6 realms unrestrained, but there are also the 5 skandhas, the 18 realms, the 12 karmas, the 4 truths, the 37 Taoist treasures, and the 81 subjects of Bodhi and Nirvana. The old man looked at Li Yundong in surprise and said, Well, you really read this book? I thought you hadn't read it. How much have you read? Li Yundong smiled and said, All of it. The old man was unhappy again. He said unhappily, Young man, you don't even have a draft when you're bragging. Then let me ask you, what is the pure believer with one thought? Although Li Yundong couldn't fully understand the Vajrasutra, he had a good memory, so he answered casually, There is no doubt about it. This one thought is the thought of no thought. If there is a second thought, it is the thought of no thought. If there is a second thought, it is the thought of calculating and doubting. The key is not to underestimate the younger generation. In the age of Dharma ending, there are also people who have the pure believer. The old man opened his mouth wide and asked again, What do you mean by Lo Allen's line? Li Yundong immediately said, Words and deeds are without doubt, and joy is silence. The old man's eyes widened, and he asked again unwillingly, Then tell me, what is the pure believer? Li Yundong said with a smile, The pure believer is not real. The pure believer is the Bodhi. If you can't get it according to your words, it is the pure believer. If you can't get it according to your words, it is the pure believer. The old man asked one question after another. Not only did Li Yundong answer quickly and without thinking, but his answers were almost exactly the same as those in the book. Only then was the old man convinced. He looked at Li Yundong in shock and said, You finished reading it so quickly. That's amazing. I've underestimated you. Have you also finished reading the sutra? Li Yundong said with a smile. Yes, why don't you take a test too? The old man laughed and waved his hand. Forget it, forget it. You can't be defeated by the test. I believe you. I just think that it's impossible for young people nowadays to understand these scriptures, so I'm testing you. I hope you don't mind. Li Yundong chuckled, winked and said, Test, test, test. The teacher's powerful magical weapon, the student's lifeblood. When the old man heard this, he laughed and said in a loud voice, Not bad, not bad. I've found the feeling of being a teacher again. Li Yundong smiled and said, Then how many points did I get just now? The old man gave him a thumbs up and said, Amazing, 100 points. As he spoke, he put on his presbyopic glasses and sighed with emotion. There are too few young people like you nowadays. Amazing, really amazing. Li Yundong was a little embarrassed by the praise. He said, I want to borrow 2 more books. The old man nodded quickly. Okay, which 2 do you want to borrow? Li Yundong said, The Sarangama Sutra and the Zongjing Record. The old man was shocked again. He glanced at Li Yundong and thought to himself, Oh my God, another 2 classics? He didn't dare to look down on Li Yundong anymore. He went to get the 2 books and said, Come back next time. I still have to take a test. Li Yundong laughed and said, Welcome, welcome. As he said this, he said hello to the old man and turned to walk out. The old man watched him leave and couldn't help but dial a phone number. Hello, Xiaohua. Today I met an expert who can challenge you. That Dharma study TSK. Amazing, really amazing. What? Old man? Ha, you're wrong. He's about the same age as you. And he's even in the same school as you. You don't believe me? Ha! You'll know when you meet him one day. Don't be so arrogant all day long. You think that you're amazing just because you got the top scorer in the city. There are many people in this world who are better than you. Chapter 199. Go to watch net. When Li Yundong returned home in the afternoon, he finished reading the Sarangama Sutra and the Zongjing Lu. When he went to school the next day, he first went to the library to return the books, then borrowed the 2 books, Treatise on Typhoid and Miscellaneous Diseases, and Huandong Revival chapter. Go to watch net. When the old man in the library saw that Li Yundong was no longer borrowing Buddhist classics this time, but medical and Taoist classics, he couldn't help but ask curiously, "You really read all kinds of books? You can even understand these?" Li Yundong nodded with a smile. "It's normal. I can barely make do with it. If there's something I don't understand, I'll slowly understand it in the future." The old man nodded. "Well, you like to read but don't seek to understand. Good. You have the style of Tao Yuanming." Li Yundong smiled and walked out of the library with the 2 books. Although it was already the beginning of school, the campus was already full of people. There were new students who had just entered the school and were full of vigor and curiosity about everything. There were also old students who gathered in 2s and 3s and pointed at the new students and made comments about them. Li Yundong stood on the campus with the fan of 7 treasures on his back and suddenly felt a wave of emotion in his heart. He suddenly remembered the day he had met the little girl. Su Chan had flown into his arms like a fluttering butterfly and changed his fate from then on. Li Yundong looked at the familiar campus and the familiar faces. He remembered the bits and pieces of time he had spent with Su Chan and the arduous cultivation he had gone to Tibet. He suddenly felt as if it had been a lifetime. Li Yundong sighed in his heart and walked toward the teaching building. There were old students in the school who knew him. When they saw him, the boys who had been chatting and laughing immediately stopped talking and stood still. They couldn't help but stand to the side and look at Li Yundong, not daring to say a word. The girls who had been chattering and laughing also stopped talking and looked at Li Yundong with admiration. No matter how brave some of them were, they only dared to look at him from afar. But they didn't dare to go forward and talk to him. Wherever Li Yundong went, it was as if a water-repellent pearl had entered the sea. The crowd automatically parted and made way for him. The people next to him didn't even dare to breathe. Although 2 months had passed, the legend left by Li Yundong in this school had been deeply rooted in people's hearts. The older students who had witnessed and heard these things would spend the rest of their lives remembering these things and spreading these things. Watch net. Color *** literature _learning %super #speed. Update. However, there were also some freshmen who had just entered the university. Although they couldn't help but stand aside and stare at Li Yundong, their eyes were filled with curiosity, confusion, doubt, envy, and even jealousy. "Who is this guy? Why are you acting like a mafia boss?" a freshman asked in confusion. A second-year senior student standing next to him looked at him with disdain and said, "Your life will probably only reach the level of a mafia boss." "Then who is he?" The freshman was not convinced and said, "Is he worse than the boss of the underworld?" "Young man, you should check out the school forum more often," the senior student said disdainfully. "He's a legend of our school," the freshman snorted and said disapprovingly. "What's so great about him? You talk like he's worth tens of thousands of dollars." In the past, Li Yundong would have been affected by these kinds of comments. But now he only felt that his heart was as calm as still water. Li Yundong walked into the classroom and sat down. For a moment, all the students in the classroom stopped talking and looked at him in unison. Their eyes followed Li Yundong wherever he went. When Li Yundong sat down, they went back to whispering and chattering, but the topic of conversation had changed to Li Yundong. I haven't seen him in 2 months, and he seems to have gotten even more handsome. Yeah, as the saying goes, a girl changes 18 times before she reaches womanhood. Could it be that men are like this too? He seems to have tanned a little and become more manly. Li Yundong looked around the classroom and saw the class monitor, Sun Li. He smiled and nodded at her as a form of greeting, but Zhou Qin was nowhere to be seen. Li Yundong didn't see Zhou Qin until class started. Ding Nan, on the other hand, was late. Go to watch net. 7K. OM. After class was over, Li Yundong called out to Ding Nan. Ding Nan. Ding Nan had changed a lot as well. She used to dress fashionably and sexily, but now she was wearing a light cyan casual dress, which made her look no different from an ordinary student. Her hair was also cascading down her back, making her look very plain. When she saw Li Yundong, her eyes immediately lit up. She said with surprise and joy, Li Yundong, it's you. I haven't seen you for 2 months. You've become more handsome. Li Yundong smiled. I'm fine. By the way, have you seen Zhou Qin? The smile on Ding Nan's face crumbled when she heard this. Her eyes were filled with disappointment and anger. You never took the initiative to talk to me before, she said. I was wondering why you suddenly took the initiative to look for me today. You wanted to ask me about Zhou Qin, didn't you? So I was just flattering myself. Li Yundong's smile froze. Aren't you guys good friends? He said sheepishly. I just thought it was a little strange that she didn't show up today. Call her yourself. Ding Nan said angrily. You have her phone number, don't you? After that, she turned around and stormed off, tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know that the hatred between Zhou Qin and Ding Nan was so deep that it was almost unsolvable. He thought he had said something wrong. As he stood there speechlessly, he suddenly felt someone reach out and pat him on the shoulder. Li Yundong took a step back and turned around. When he looked back, he saw that Feng Na's hand had reached out and patted the air. Cheng Cheng was looking at him with pursed lips and a smile. Haha, it's you guys. Li Yundong laughed. It really is you. Feng Na stared at Li Yundong in a daze. I couldn't even recognize you when I saw you yesterday. Li Yundong smiled. Have I really changed that much? Feng Na looked at Li Yundong carefully. In her eyes, this boy had become thinner than before, but this thinness made him look more refined and masculine, full of strength. His skin had become darker, which was obviously the result of frequent exposure to the sun during the summer. His hair had become longer, but he looked elegant and elegant. His eyes had become deeper, brighter, and more charming. Most importantly, he seemed to have lost all traces of the little boy he used to be. Instead, he was a man who was becoming more mature. You. Feng Na was in a trance for a moment. She felt that the Li Yundong in front of her had become a different person. There was only a similar shell here, and many things inside had changed. She couldn't recognize him anymore. You've changed so much. Feng Na couldn't help but reach out her hand, wanting to touch Li Yundong's face. You've changed so much that I can't recognize you anymore. Are you really Li Yundong? Li Yundong smiled slightly. I'm the real deal. Cheng Cheng also looked Li Yundong up and down, then sighed. What did you do during the summer? Why do you look like a different person now? Something important must have happened during the 2 months of the summer, right? Feng Na suddenly asked. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. A woman's intuition is really scary. He smiled. He didn't admit it, but he didn't deny it either. Feng Na knew that Li Yundong didn't want to talk about it, so she didn't ask any more questions. She stared at Li Yundong for a while, until Cheng Cheng couldn't stand it anymore, and secretly gave Feng Na an elbow. Feng Na snapped out of her daze. Ah, look, she said. The new semester has started. How about I find a place to treat you to dinner? Li Yundong laughed. No way. You want me to take advantage of you on the first day? Cheng Cheng giggled. You want to take advantage of Nana? Okay. She couldn't ask for more. Feng Na turned around and pinched the soft flesh of Cheng Cheng's waist, her face red with embarrassment. I told you to say it. I told you to say it. Feng Na said angrily. The two of them fought for a while. After Cheng Cheng humiliated her and begged for mercy, Feng Na returned to the court in victory. She glanced at Li Yundong, her cheeks red, as if she was afraid that he would overthink it. But when Feng Na looked at Li Yundong, she saw him standing there, unmoving like a mountain. There was a faint smile on his face, and his eyes were calm and warm. He was like a transcendent being. Feng Na's heart skipped a beat. She knew that her feeling was right. This boy was really different from before. He had grown up and matured. She could tell from the calm manner in which he stood there. Sorry for making a fool of myself again. Feng Na coughed dryly and explained, blushing. Li Yundong smiled. It's nothing. Where are we going for dinner? Cheng Cheng smiled. Didn't you say that we were going to a restaurant last time? But then President Chow came, so we didn't go. Let's go to that restaurant now. Feng Na smiled. Okay. Let's go there. Then she suddenly thought of something. By the way, where's Su Chan? Why don't I see her with you? Aren't the two of you inseparable? Li Yundong smiled and said. She went to her master's place. Feng Na saw that although Li Yundong was calm when he said this, she keenly caught a flash of longing and a touch of sadness in the corner of his eyes. Her heart skipped a beat, and she asked tentatively, then when will she come back? Li Yundong smiled. It won't be long. It should be in 2 months. I'll pick her up. Feng Na didn't say anything, but a trace of sadness flashed in her eyes. The three of them walked downstairs. As soon as they left the teaching building, Jiang Xiuxiu saw Feng Na. She was about to go up and say hello when she saw the boy who had helped her carry her luggage and acted so cool that he had no conscience was also with her. Jiang Xiuxiu sneered in her heart. Wow, last time you said you didn't know him, and now you're hooking up with him. It turns out that you didn't want me to know him yesterday. Humph, isn't he just a guy who likes to act cool? What's so great about him? How dare he act cool in front of me? I'll go and provoke him. /om/. Chapter 200. Go to watch net. Thinking of this, Jiang Xiuxiu rolled her eyes and pretended to be surprised. Wow, senior, it's so rare to meet you here. After that, she seemed to recognize Li Yundong and said in surprise, Handsome, you're here too? Li Yundong smiled and nodded at her. Feng Na was about to introduce Li Yundong to Jiang Xiuxiu, but Jiang Xiuxiu pretended to be surprised and said, Senior sister, you left so fast yesterday. I have so many questions to ask you. Jiang Xiuxiu was like a machine gun, talking and complaining about a lot of things. Most of them were complaints about freshmen who had just arrived at this place and were unfamiliar with it. Feng Na couldn't help laughing and said, You are so beautiful. There should be a lot of boys rushing to help you. Jiang Xiuxiu rolled her eyes, pointed to the mulberry tree and scolded the locust tree, and said, Senior sister, there are some, but some boys really know how to act cool. After helping, they actually turn around and leave. They are really not gentlemanly. Go to watch net. 7K. OM. Feng Na smiled and said, Does he want you to marry him? Jiang Xiuxiu covered her mouth and giggled. Senior, you are so funny. By the way, last night I heard that there is a very legendary figure in our school. I think his name is Li Yundong, right? Feng Na couldn't help glancing at Li Yundong. Just as she was about to say that the person next to her was Li Yundong, Jiang Xiuxiu said, Hey senior, is what they said true? Is that Li Yundong really that handsome? Is he really that strong? Those things sound so incredible. Feng Na's expression was a little strange. She tried to hold back her laughter and said to Li Yundong, Hey, what do you think? Is this Li Yundong really that handsome? Is he really that strong? Li Yundong also had a strange look on his face. He had never encountered a situation like mistaking Feng Jing for Ma Liang. He coughed and said, Actually, he is very ordinary. Although he said it modestly, Jiang Xiuxiu didn't think so. She had deliberately used this legendary figure to provoke the cool-looking boy in front of her. The little girl's mind was very simple. Aren't you trying to be cool in front of me? Don't use this kind of retreating in order to advance. Do you think I don't know how to use it? There are a lot of people in this school who are better than you. Isn't Li Yundong one of them? Compared with him, don't put on airs in front of me. Jiang Xiuxiu felt that Li Yundong's words were obviously sour grapes. She couldn't help but snort and say, "Can you send an adult flying with a punch from a few meters away? Can you dodge 7 close-range shots from a gunman in a school shooting? Can you save 2 girls who jumped off the building one after another? Can you make a Mercedes move half a meter horizontally with one punch? From what I see, you only know how to act cool and say some sour words." Logically speaking, if a guy helped a beautiful girl and then left in a cool manner, doing a good deed without leaving his name, and now being scolded by this girl, there was a high chance that he would feel very indignant. Watch net. Okay, I helped you, and now you're scolding me? This was the normal way of thinking. Therefore, as long as an ordinary guy said this, Jiang Xiuxiu immediately had the right to speak. She could lead the guy by the nose and say, "Didn't you want to act cool? Why are you taking me seriously now? Now you know how to be anxious. You're just playing hard to get my attention, aren't you?" Jiang Xiuxiu had been beautiful since she was a child, so she could be said to be well-versed in the methods of war between men and women. She was familiar with all kinds of strategies. Therefore, in her opinion, this guy actually dared to play tricks on her. He really overestimated himself. But Jiang Xiuxiu never thought that the guy in front of her was actually an ordinary student. Jiang Xiuxiu's words made Cheng, who had been silent all this time, burst into laughter. Feng Na couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. The 2 girls pointed at Li Yundong and laughed so hard that they were rocking back and forth. They had never seen Li Yundong being talked about like that before. What was even funnier was that Jiang Xiuxiu actually used Li Yundong's past to mock him. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but Jiang Xiuxiu thought that she had hit the soft spot of the boy in front of her. She took Feng Na's arm with a smile and said, "Senior, do you think so too?" The more Feng Na thought about it, the funnier she felt. In the end, she laughed so hard that tears almost flowed out of her eyes. Jiang Xiuxiu grabbed her arm, so she held back her laughter and nodded. Yes, this guy loves to act cool." Cheng rubbed her stomach with one hand, and her cheeks that were sore from laughing with the other. She said, "Junior sister, you're really amazing. You can see through this guy's true colors at a glance. Amazing." After that, the 2 girls burst into laughter again. Watch net. 7K. OM. Net. Super_speed. More. New. Jiang Xiuxiu didn't notice that the 2 girls' laughter was a little strange. Instead, she said proudly, "Of course, I have a pair of fiery eyes." Feng Na wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, "So you're also a fan of Li Yundong, right?" In order to provoke the boy in front of her, Jiang Xiuxiu nodded vigorously and pretended to be infatuated with him. "Of course," she said. "I'm the most hardcore kind." Cheng patted Feng Na on the shoulder and laughed. "Nana, congratulations. Your fan club has gained another hardcore member." Jiang Xiuxiu asked curiously, "Senior, you too?" Feng Na glanced at Li Yundong calmly and said, "Of course. When I first saw him, I made him my idol. I'm the leader of the fan club." Jiang Xiuxiu giggled. "Then I want to be the deputy leader." Cheng protested loudly. "No, I'm the deputy leader." Jiang Xiuxiu saw that Cheng was her senior, so she didn't dare to argue. She had to pretend to be very wronged and said, "Then, can I be the secretary of the Youth League branch?" Secretary of the Youth League branch? Cheng and Feng Na looked at each other and laughed at the same time. Li Yundong, who didn't know whether to laugh or cry, also couldn't help laughing. He said, "By the way, Feng Na, I saw a book in Xinhua bookstore a few days ago. Was it written by you?" Feng Na had known Li Yundong for a few months. She knew that no matter how much the boy had changed, his humorous nature would not change. She smiled and said, "Which book?" Li Yundong blinked his eyes and said, "My regiment, Commander, my regiment?" Feng Na punched Li Yundong in the arm and burst into laughter. Yes, your captain, your team." Cheng burst into laughter as well. She laughed for a while, then suddenly thought of something. "My leader, my team? My leader? Isn't the leader Nana? Is he hinting something to Nana?" When you have a crush on someone, both men and women will subconsciously take each other's words and actions as a kind of action with incomparable meaning, and take great pains to repeatedly ponder the deep meaning. Cheng Cheng was the first to think of it, and Feng Na also quickly reacted. Her heart was thumping, and she glanced at Li Yundong. Is he hinting something to me? She thought to herself. Li Yundong didn't expect that he couldn't help but say something to make fun of them. Suddenly, the two girls began to think. Jiang Xiuxiu, who was standing to one side, saw that the two senior sisters suddenly stopped talking and were in a daze. She thought that her suggestion had provoked them, so she said, "Oh, senior sister, I just said it casually. It's okay if it's not appropriate." Feng Na came back to her senses and said with a smile, "It's okay. You can be the secretary of the Youth League branch. But the position of secretary of the Youth League branch is a little small." As she said this, she covered her mouth and laughed. Jiang Xiuxiu laughed carelessly and said, "A small official is still an official. Don't treat a bean bun like dry food." As she said this, she took Feng Na's arm in a very familiar manner, and looked as if she was going to marry Feng Na. "Senior sister, I'll follow you from now on. When you become the president of the student union in the future, you have to protect me." Feng Na's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told Jiang Xiuxiu about her specific position in the student union, let alone that the president of the student union was going to abdicate this year, and that she was going to run for it. It could be seen that this girl was very scheming. As soon as she arrived, she had inquired about all kinds of things in the school. She was a person who was very good at currying favor, but her means of currying favor were not so disgusting. Feng Na smiled and said, "Okay, I need your support." Seeing that Feng Na didn't deny it, Jiang Xiuxiu was immediately overjoyed. Thinking that she had found a backer, she raised her chin at Li Yundong arrogantly and said, "See? This is called bearing." Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't bother to argue with her. He looked at Feng Na and said, "Are you going to be the president of the student union?" Feng Na nodded and sighed slightly. "Yes, I'm in my senior year. It's my last year. I'm going to run for the president of the student union. It can be considered as adding a stroke to my graduation resume." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "That's a good thing. When the time comes, I will do my best to support you." Feng Na laughed and said, "Really? Then I really have to thank you in advance. I really have something to trouble you with." Li Yundong said exaggeratedly, "No way. I was just being polite. Did you really take it seriously?" Feng Na laughed and said, "Of course. Since you've asked, a gentleman will naturally keep his word. Wouldn't I be a fool if I didn't quickly make a decision?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Well, I know. In the future, I won't open my mouth even if you beat me to death." Feng Na chuckled and said, "Don't look so aggrieved. The freshman welcome party is in a few days. How about you come to contribute a program?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Me? In what name will I contribute a program? Don't bring up the Taekwondo club again." Feng Na pursed her lips and smiled. "You just said that you would do your best to support me, and now you want to back out? No way." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "I said that I would do my best to support you as the president of the student union. I didn't say that I would go to the freshman welcome party." Jiang Xiuxiu, who had been listening for a while, couldn't help but speak up for Feng Na. "Why is it so difficult to ask you for a favor? When I asked you for your name, you didn't tell me. But when the future president of the student union condescended to ask you for help, you didn't even give me face. What do you mean? Hey, are you out of stock? I think you're all brawn and no brain. At most, you can perform something like splitting a wooden board or breaking a rock with your chest." In order to flatter Feng Na, Jiang Xiuxiu's words were a little rude. But when she mentioned something interesting about Li Yundong, both Feng Na and Cheng Qing burst into laughter. The tension immediately dissipated, and Li Yundong couldn't help but chuckle. Feng Na laughed and said, "See? Even my righteous words can't make you turn over a new leaf?" Li Yundong smiled and said, Okay. You guys are good. I can't beat you in an argument. As long as you become the president of the student union, I will participate in the performance." But let me say this first. Don't mess with me like last time. Feng Na and Ching Ching burst into laughter again. Only those who had experienced the funny thing about Li Yundong could understand the humor in this kind of laughter. Jiang Xiuxiu laughed dryly, but in her heart, she was rolling her eyes. Are these people crazy? What's so funny? /om/. Chapter 201. Go to watch net. Feng Na and Cheng Cheng laughed for a while. Feng Na held back her laughter and said, "We were so busy chatting that we forgot to eat. Let's go for lunch first." After that, she looked at Jiang Xiuxiu and said with a smile, "Why don't you join us?" Jiang Xiuxiu wanted to curry favor with this senior sister, who had a certain amount of influence in the school, so she smiled and said, Sure. They went out of the school gate and went to the restaurant. However, when they arrived at the restaurant, they found that they had wasted their time chatting at the bottom of the teaching building. As a result, the restaurant was already full of people, and there was a row of students waiting for a table at the entrance. Watch net. 7K. OM. Net. Super_speed. More. New Jiang Xiuxiu couldn't help but click her tongue. Wow, so many people. Feng Na smiled bitterly. The business here is getting better and better. Is Sichuan cuisine really that good? Ching Ching teased. Nonsense, even a Jiangxia person like you came to eat. What do you think? Let's go back to the cafeteria for lunch. No matter how many people there are, we don't have to worry about not being able to eat. Feng Na hesitated for a moment. How about I treat you to lunch at the cafeteria? That's not very good, is it? Li Yundong chuckled and said, That's nothing. It's not like I haven't eaten it before. Li Yundong was talking about the last time he had eaten with President Chao, Zhou Qin, and the others in the cafeteria. Feng Na and Cheng Cheng both remembered the scene of Li Yundong singing with all his heart at that time, and they immediately smiled. Feng Na smiled and said, All right then, let's go to the cafeteria. I hope there's still food left. Jiang Xiuxiu had thought she could freeload a good meal, but she didn't expect to be sent back to the cafeteria. She was a little unhappy in her heart, but she didn't show it on her face. Instead, she smiled and said, Okay. This is the first time I've eaten in this school's cafeteria. I wonder how the food is. Seeing that she did not object, Feng Na smiled and said, Then let's go home. After that, the four of them turned around and walked towards the school cafeteria. At this time, the school cafeteria was still crowded with people. As soon as Li Yundong, Feng Na, and the others entered the cafeteria, some of the older students recognized Li Yundong. They immediately made way for him, even lowering their voices. When Jiang Xiuxiu saw them enter the cafeteria, the people around them looked at them with admiration. No matter how arrogant she was, she knew that these people couldn't be looking at her. But she also felt that these people couldn't be looking at this arrogant boy. So she took it for granted that these people must be looking at Feng Na. Watch net. 7K. OM. Jiang Xiuxiu couldn't help but sigh. Senior sister, there are so many people who know you in this school. Feng Na hadn't realized the true meaning of Jiang Xiuxiu's words. She said casually, It's all right. After all, I've been here for 3 years. I'm familiar with them. Jiang Xiuxiu saw that wherever they went, people would make way for them. Even their voices were much lower. It was like a lord inspecting his territory, or a mafia boss patrolling his territory. It was really cool. Senior sister Feng Na, Cheng Cheng exclaimed. I just realized how prestigious you are. Wherever you go, people will make way for you. You're amazing. Feng Na was stunned. Of course, she knew who these people were in awe of. Feng Na opened her mouth and was about to explain, but Cheng Cheng quietly pinched her waist. Feng Na turned her head to look at Cheng Cheng, only to see the mischievous look in Cheng Cheng's eyes. Cheng Cheng shook her head at her. Feng Na suppressed her laughter and didn't say what she was going to say. After the four of them bought the food and sat down, Jiang Xiuxiu still couldn't stop sighing with emotion. So powerful, so awesome. Today I finally see what a big sister is. It's really awesome. I don't know when I can get to such a level. Feng Na glanced at Li Yundong and saw that he was calm and didn't introduce himself. She held back her laughter and said, "Fortunately, I'm not a big deal. Li Yundong is the real power here. He is the local bully here." As she said this, Feng Na tapped Li Yundong's plate with her chopsticks. "Hey, don't you think so?" Li Yundong looked at Feng Na helplessly. Yes, yes, yes. Jiang Xiuxiu opened her mouth wide, her face full of longing. "Senior sister, you're already so cool. What about Li Yundong? Isn't he like an emperor on a trip? Isn't he like an emperor on a trip? Will he be worshipped by hundreds of officials?" Cheng Qing couldn't help but burst out laughing, almost spitting out the rice in her mouth. She coughed hard, waved her hand, and said to Jiang Xiuxiu, "Sorry I choked." Seeing her like this, Jiang Xiuxiu couldn't help but wonder, was what I just said so funny? Why are these guys so weird? As Feng Na patted Ching Cheng's back, she said to Li Yundong mischievously, "Hey, is Li Yundong's trip that exaggerated?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly. How could it be that exaggerated? Jiang Xiuxiu was unhappy. How is it exaggerated? You can't bear to see him being more prestigious than you. Can you? Can't bear to see him being more prestigious than you? Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I didn't say that. I just think that ahem. You're praising him too much. Jiang Xiuxiu was excited. She said, "Isn't he more prestigious than you? Isn't he more prestigious than you? What can you do that he can do?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly. Yes, yes, he's more prestigious than me. Go to the internet. 7K. OM. Jiang Xiuxiu snorted. Just as she was about to speak again, she suddenly heard a surprised voice next to her. Li Yundong. As they spoke, Li Yundong, Feng Na, and Cheng Cheng all looked in the direction of the voice. Jiang Xiuxiu suddenly stood up, her heart beating wildly. Li Yundong? Where is Li Yundong? Li Yundong saw two girls standing in front of him. One was wearing a famous brand dress, and was dressed fashionably. Although the other was also dressed very beautifully, she had a slim figure and a delicate face, which revealed a different kind of charm. Li Yundong recognized the girl. He was suddenly stunned. Wasn't this the girl who danced at the party last time? He said, "You're Zhuang Hui?" Zhuang Hui smiled, picked up her plate, and asked, "Can I sit down?" Feng Na, who was standing next to Zhuang Hui, couldn't help but say, "Don't you think it's very crowded here?" Ke Lu, who was standing next to Zhuang Hui, couldn't help but snort. "Let's go, Hui Hui. There's nothing to say to them." Then she turned around and left with her plate. Zhuang Hui glanced at her and sighed. Seeing that Ke Lu had made up her mind to leave, Zhuang Hui had no choice but to turn her head helplessly and look at Li Yundong. "Can I treat you to dinner next time?" Before Li Yundong could say anything, Feng Na sneered. People who want to treat him to a meal are lining up all the way to Beijing. A trace of anger flashed in Zhuang Hui's eyes. She glared at Feng Na and left. Li Yundong looked at Feng Na in surprise. "Do you have a grudge against her?" Feng Na looked at Li Yundong apologetically and forced a smile. "I'm sorry. I lost control of my emotions." Cheng Cheng, his best friend, laughed and said, "They are sworn enemies. Women always have one or two sworn enemies who don't see eye to eye with each other. You know what I mean?" Li Yundong didn't know Zhuang Hui very well, so he didn't take it to heart. He just smiled and said nothing. However, Jiang Xiuxiu stared at them with her eyes wide open. She couldn't help saying, Hey, slow down." Jiang Xiuxiu pointed at Li Yundong and said, "Are you Li Yundong?" "No way. How could you be Li Yundong?" Li Yundong laughed. "Why can't I be Li Yundong?" Jiang Xiuxiu suddenly felt a little crazy. She looked at Feng Na and Cheng Cheng in exasperation, wanting to confirm it with them. But she saw that Feng Na and Cheng Cheng were already smiling shiftily. Jiang Xiuxiu suddenly felt like her head was going to explode. "Oh no, I'm so embarrassed this time." Jiang Xiuxiu already knew in her heart that the boy in front of her was most likely Li Yundong. But she still asked unwillingly, "Are you Li Yundong?" Before Li Yundong had time to speak, he suddenly heard a boy not far behind him say, "Hongling, what's so good about this school? The teachers are poor. The teachers are not famous. There are no good majors. And there are no good tutors. Look, the food in the cafeteria is not good. Bah, what is this fried food? It tastes terrible. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. Hongling. He immediately turned his head to look at the boy who had spoken. Sure enough, sitting opposite the boy was a beautiful girl with a ponytail. Her forehead was full and bright, and her eyes were bright. She looked confident and proud. Who else could it be but Ruan Hongling? Why is she in this school? Li Yundong suddenly widened his eyes. Hearing the boy in front of her talking, Ruan Hongling couldn't help but slap the table and stand up. She shouted angrily, Yanhua, are you done? I didn't ask you to study here with me. Tsinghua and Peking University are good. You can study there. Why are you dawdling here? Why are you talking so much nonsense? The students who had heard Yanhua slander Tian'an University before heard Ruan Hongling's words and immediately cheered and said loudly, well said. There were also some people who sneered. I'm afraid you won't be able to get in. Yanhua turned his head and glared at these people. He said arrogantly and rudely, you haven't even heard of my name? Don't you know the name of this year's college entrance examination champion in Tian'an City? Do I care about this lousy school? Tsinghua and Peking University begged me to go, but I didn't. I'm going with Hongling. Do you have a problem with that? After that, he turned his head and smiled obsequiously like a bullied wife. He said in a low voice, I'm just saying. Don't take it seriously. Don't be angry. I just don't understand. With your grades, you can easily get into Peking University or Tsinghua University. Why do you want to study in this school? Ruan Hongling was angry in her heart. This boy had pestered her from junior high school to high school, all the way to college. It was like he was possessed by a ghost. Ruan Hongling was so angry that she was about to curse, but she suddenly seemed to feel a sharp and bright gaze looking at her. Her heart skipped a beat. She followed the gaze and immediately saw Li Yundong. There were several reasons why Ruan Hongling had come to this university. It was not only because this university was in the city where she cultivated, but also because it was relatively peaceful. Moreover, she could help Li Yundong cultivate at a close distance. Most importantly, Sister Ziyuan's sweetheart was here. This guy looked like a very lascivious man, so she had to help her Shiji keep a close eye on him. When Ruan Hongling saw Li Yundong, she was happy at first, but soon she saw Feng Na, Cheng Cheng, and Jiang Xiuxiu beside him. She suddenly became furious and thought, I knew this guy was lascivious. It's only his first day at school, and he's already hooking up with 3 beautiful women. Damn it, really damn it. Ruan Hongling sneered and said to Yanhua, do you want to know why I came to this school? Yanhua nodded and said, yes. Ruan Hongling pointed to Li Yundong and said without thinking, I came to this school because of him. This was also the truth, but when it was said at this time, it really made people's imagination run wild. Li Yundong was suddenly shocked and couldn't help but shout, Hey, Hongling, what nonsense are you talking about? Yanhua heard this, huh? You even called her Hongling? Bastard, this is a name that only I can call her. What right do you have to call her that? Yanhua suddenly became jealous. He turned around and looked at Li Yundong with his head tilted. He said with a disdainful sneer, Are you Li Yundong? Strongly recommend Hai Chen's new book, Blood Evil Demon. Welcome children to take a look /om/ that you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.